we've already talked about making me into a thing, making my thoughts and emotions into a thing, that whole network, and making these subtle states into a thing. But all of that selfing, however subtle it is, like even if there's the tiniest layer of subtle fogginess outside, like in the edge of the aura left, it still creates a distance to the natural state, to emptiness. There's still a separation between my experience now and this future goal, or this goal of spiritual practice, emptiness. Like when that last bit of the selfing mechanism disappeared, there wasn't anything that separated emptiness from this very ordinary experience. There isn't a thing called emptiness. It doesn't exist. It's not in any way separate from anything else that we experience when it's realized. When it's realized, it is exposed as the very nature of everything that exists. It's like well, you could say compassion, but it's just this love, and it's like it's just there. And so it's the greatest act of love that you can do for other beings, it seems to me, to fully weed out the problem and assume your natural form that is formless. Getting too poetic here for my own taste.
Hello and welcome to the Lion Face Guru podcast. I'm Chris, and this is another in a series of interviews with the Mahasiddhas of Amrita Mandala Sangha, those who have reached first stage of Buddhahood, the complete realization of emptiness, attained perfect wakefulness for the sake of all beings. Today's guest is Amrita Simha, a family man from northern Norway, who talks about his path from initial awakening, which he describes as his entry to the non-dual path, to his later recognition of and progressive stabilization into the natural state, his Buddhanature, to the stage of complete and irreversible realization of emptiness, where one abides fully and permanently in one's own Buddhanature, first stage of Buddhahood, where all ideas of self as something solid, permanent and separate has completely gone, completely been seen through, the stage he reached and stabilized in just over a year ago. Simha's account is a somewhat thorough and personal account of the path, from what led him to the search in the first place, how he found Amrita Mandala Sangha, a discussion of the two-part formula to awakening as an entry point to the Tantric path, his progression through the opening and perfection stages of the path as related to the 13 Bhumi Model, which is explained in some detail, his experience of temporary cessations where the selfing mechanism completely releases itself for a short time, and how bodhicitta, the heart wish to attain enlightenment for the sake of all beings, was so necessary to taking this all the way, and his experience of life having now completely stabilized this insight into the empty nature of all phenomena, having realized first stage Buddhahood. Simha will be the first to say that this isn't the full realization of Buddhahood, the final attainment known as Lightbody or full rainbow body. He gives a very open and honest account of how he is still affected by so-called echo karmas that are still trapped in the meridian system of the body, supposedly remains of past trauma, that still need to be worked through and released in order to completely free the body and realize the light body. So I hope you enjoy this interview. Please feel free to find out more about Amrita Mandala Sangha at amritamandala.com, where we also have a book called Buddhas Among Us, with accounts from other members of our Sangha who have also reached this first stage Buddhahood. Please remember to like, subscribe and share if you think these interviews will be beneficial to others. Thank you for watching. So welcome, Amrita Simha, to the Lion Face Guru podcast. Amrita Simha discovered Amrita Mandala Sangha back in late 2015, and it was through the two-part formula to awakening. And it was a few years later in 2019 when I discovered Amrita Mandala Sangha through the two-part formula also, and that was via Amrita Simha, who helped guide me to awakening. And Amrita Simha and James were the first people I met of Amrita Mandala, and the only physical contact I had with Amrita Mandala Sangha, because that was when COVID hit. So I was very fortunate that I met someone, and my first impressions were of someone who was really taking the spiritual path seriously, someone who was balanced in themselves, was very grounded, and had an incredibly stable presence. And so this encouraged me to stay with this new path that I'd found. So I'm forever grateful for that. So in this episode, I want to find out about your background, of what led you to the spiritual path in the first place and to Amrita Mandala Sangha, and then we'll go from there. So what was it that drew you to the spiritual path? What was this existential pain for you?
Well, first of all, thank you for introducing me. So let's see. Well, I guess it's kind of natural to begin with a kind of childhood foundation. I think it started there, my need for some solution to existential problems. I think, like, by many standards or measures, my childhood was a good one. Like, from a material standpoint, I had everything I needed. Like, I had kind or good parents. Now that I'm able to put words to it, to that kind of feeling of something being off that I experienced in my childhood, it is that while being, good parents, my parents were very much kind of absorbed in their own mental world, so to speak. It's not that uncommon, in our society that people are, but it was quite often to the point where I didn't feel like I was actually being seen or listened to. Like, it had like an impact on how I viewed myself. But anyways, like, in a description of some of the symptoms that came, one was this kind of like a addictive behavior, that I would seek relief from whatever discomfort I was feeling in various substances. And like, from an early age, that was alcohol. Like, by early age, I mean that first time I got drunk, I was 11 years old. I didn't start drinking regularly at 11, but I remember it very well that there was this sense of relief, like, wow, is this really possible to feel like this? And just by drinking this, drinking this wine that I stole at the time from my grandparents. But it did, this alcohol use did develop. So by already, 13, 14, I was drinking quite regularly, and also stealing. That, I stole from my grandparents all the liquor, which I guess is quite common to do a few times, but it kind of became a pattern that I would disregard other people's property to satisfy that need for relief in myself, and found also that very much helped with my social anxiety that I was dealing with as well. I should say that one of the main symptoms that I've had since a very early age is this feeling of insecurity in myself, like very low self-esteem. Even though I wasn't unpopular in school, I was quite well liked. I never had any issues of being frozen out of any community or anything like that, or being treated as I was less than. But still, I had this internal image of myself as much less, just in general, than other people. And always comparing, always this mechanism of comparing and not being happy with what I did have, because somebody else had it much better or were much better at something, and so on. So it wasn't primarily for social reasons that I started drinking. It was to get this relief. But as I grew older and my peers started drinking, because they started a little later than myself, so it did develop quite rapidly, and I was making my own wine, maybe at 17 years old, like brewing in my closet, in my room. And then, when that was finished, I had 25 liters of wine, and I would drink it until it was gone, and then I would make another one. So it was just this no self-control when it came to it. If it was available, I would drink it. But anyways, it was this pattern of just pushing on, and so it was kind of like out of control from I didn't follow the rules the same way that it seemed. I didn't care for the rules in the same way. And I think that's partly a personality thing, because it hasn't gone away. I still don't, how do you say, like, acknowledge an authority just because it's on paper. I do acknowledge like real authority when it's proven, but not just because somebody says so. But anyways, I think it was also this addiction that was driving this, or this self-centeredness, that I could do this. Like, I could get drunk in any situation, and I didn't really care about what other people thought about it, or how I behaved. So yeah, this self-centeredness was there. And as it progressed, this addiction, I would start stealing more, not just from family, but also from regular stores. And eventually this addictive behavior kind of expanded to include other drugs. Started smoking cannabis at one point, but I've tried like the big ones, all of the big ones, but kind of those that stuck were the alcohol, the weed, the coffee, and the sugar. Yeah, so it became apparent that there was something off, but I didn't really recognize it clearly at the time, because I was so absorbed with myself. I was suffering, but I didn't know the alternative, to put it like that. I didn't know that there was an alternative to feeling like I did. So I kind of just accepted it, or just continued walking in the same path as I had, like in the same cycles, to put it like that. And I had tried psychedelics. They grow here in northern Norway, and I guess in most of Europe they are quite readily available. I had read about these magic mushrooms, and I set out to find them. I needed to try this because it sounded different from anything else that I had tried. And I had maybe like one trip a year for 3 years, just kind of fun, getting like this fun buzz going, weird thoughts, laughter, like this kind of, a very mild trip, like just for fun. But then a friend of mine and I, we hit the jackpot and found a massive amount of these mushrooms one year. So we started with one dose that turned out to be in the range of like still just for fun, so weird thoughts, kind of, having this kind of hippie trip that was just fun and games. Yeah, so we decided then to take the rest, do it properly, and we did. And immediately after I ate that last dose of mushrooms, I had this massive nervousness settle in the gut, like this ball of contraction, like a big knot, that it just felt really wrong, really bad, so like something really bad is about to happen. And I started thinking in those patterns, like I shouldn't have done that, was the exact thought. But then I kind of caught myself thinking that way, because I had done some research on this before, and I had tried it before as well. And I figured that, okay, I can't go down that route. Then I'm going to hell, or then it's going to be really bad. And so what I did was that I kind of spontaneously got into a meditation posture. I just had the instinct that, okay, now it's time to sit down and just feel it instead of fighting it. So I sat down in front of the fireplace, looked into the fire. I just felt this massive buildup of energy, and it kind of just shot upwards. I remember feeling that my body just melted, and the image that I remember it as is that it melted into gold. And then, I don't know, I have no idea like how to explain it, or how to put it into words or pictures. Well, it was like leaving this body. It felt like dying, and then I don't know, going to heaven or whatever you want to call it. And I'm not using that dying symbolically. It really did feel like going through the whole death process and just letting go of the body, letting go of everything, and then not existing anymore as something at all. And it's usually called ego death in psychedelic terms, where you take enough so that you're just obliterated as a person. You forget everything about being like a person at all. But then after a while, reality started building itself up. I kind of came back for a while, had a body, then dipped back in, and then came back, because that's how it kind of goes with these peaks. And when I started settling and started being able to think again, I wasn't thinking rationally, but be able to think at all, I was experiencing massive euphoria, like bliss, like I've discovered something. It was a very religious experience, and the first like that, like religious experience, but the bliss that came afterwards was completely unstable. Like I was, at one point, I was picking up my phone and trying to call my parents to say that, I've seen the truth, I've seen the light. I know now, and had these ideas that, everybody had gone through that experience, and that was kind of like a rite of passage to become an adult or whatever. But I couldn't figure out the phone, how it worked, fortunately. So I wasn't able to call anyone. But that initial bliss turned sour at one point, and it turned very sour. It went equally as low as it did go high. And I found myself just in this hostile world, didn't like myself, no love, completely cut off from everything, cut off from this experience that I had that I couldn't really make sense of because I couldn't remember anything of it. It was just this feeling of something big. And I didn't really feel at that point, like I felt that I couldn't really, like, how do I go on living at all in this kind of prison? But eventually I calmed down. I was able to get some sleep, and I woke up the day after, and I didn't really remember much at all. Now, even though I couldn't put any words on it, or I couldn't back then have described why or like told anybody anything coherently about it, and I didn't feel like I could continue the way that I had lived my life, I just kind of kept getting this growing sense that I have to change. I have to do something about this. It has to end. Otherwise, I'm just going to continue hurting other people, hurting myself. I mean, emotionally, just manipulating people and feeding my own addictions. And it became clear that it was like a path to a personal hell that I was on.
Would you say this was something to do with this experience of this heavenly state, this blissful euphoria, almost gave you a glimpse to a different way of being without this person or this identity that you were so grasping to, and then to be jolted back into your body, back into reality? Is that kind of how it felt? Like you were jolted back into it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that is how I view it now, is that I was kind of, whatever the content of the experience was, at the basis of it, and this was also recognized, there was this freedom, there was this openness, there was this something else, or something in contrast to all that tightness that I had felt continuously all my life. And so it was just a glimpse, into something else. This was what opened up the possibility of seeking. I can't remember if it was weeks or months after this mushroom trip, but I came across Eckhart Tolle's Power of Now, and on the book cover, either on the front or the back, the term spiritual awakening was mentioned. And as soon as I saw this, I was drawn to this word. I was kind of drawn to the book, knew that this term is significant. As I read the book, and I could feel that it was authentic, his description, his description of his own awakening was so concrete, and that I was like, okay, so this is it, there's something here, you know. What, nobody's talking about this that I know, like in my community, but there's something here, and I want it too. I want to achieve or attain whatever it is that Eckhart describes in this book, was what I was thinking and feeling at the time. But I didn't really find any practical value in his teachings. And for quite some time, I went quite deep. I've listened to a good few hours of his teachings where he describes, you know, the state that is the goal, or, you know, what he attained, describes how he experiences thing after the shift, and also describes, you know, the problem that most people, and I, you know, it was easy to recognize the problem, like, yes, you're right, I can, but this other thing there I cannot relate to completely. I feel that it's true, but how do I, you know, how do I open it up experientially? And he didn't, you know, offer any concrete practices outside of, you know, saying that you have to just kind of observe this, how it works, this self, which is, it's true, but it wasn't put into practical steps that I could follow, and so it didn't really work for me to simply listen to him, his teachings. But I did look in other directions as well. My partner back then, who is also my partner now, she took a 8-week Hatha Yoga beginner's course, and when she finished, she was like, "You have to try this. You know, there's something here." I kind of dove into Hatha Yoga. I really connected with it from the beginning, and so I did pursue it for like Hatha Yoga, including, you know, the physical postures, the breathing practices, and simple meditation techniques became my main practice for years. While I was dabbling, you know, looking into other kind of methods, that was kind of the backbone of my own practice, which hadn't been established as a daily thing back then, at, you know, from 21, 22, 23. I'm talking about these early to mid 20s. I would have these periods where I was very structured. I had like clear goals of my life. I felt that the practice was moving forward. I could feel the deepening effect. And then opposite, I would have these periods of, you know, like addiction patterns bubbling up or growing, sticking their head up, which just leads to kind of very chaotic lifestyle. But I was still able, you know, to practice a fair deal. No,
A fair amount.
a fair amount, yeah. And so I got to know these practices at least on some level. Like, I wasn't proficient or I wasn't mastering any of it, but I experienced enough to figure out that there is something here. It's doing something, and it's kind of addressing, at least partially addressing, this discomfort that I'm feeling, this constant discomfort in my body and mind. And I was also I was studying philosophy at the time, also with this same kind of attitude of seeking truth. All of these things I was doing kind of like from a truth seeking perspective, because I wanted to figure it out. But the story was, with everything that I found, it was kind of doing something, but the feeling was that it's not really doing everything. Like, it's not really working as deeply as I wanted. And, you know, I was reading classic accounts of like how historical yogis had practiced, and what they described was much deeper than what I was experiencing. Since maybe I should devote my life completely, you know, become a monk, or all kinds of thoughts like this. You know, I got fed up with philosophy because it felt like I just felt like I saw through it at one point, that there's nothing there, like there's no truth there. There's all these words, and there's all these sometimes beautiful logical creations, like castles, like explanations of various things or descriptions of different phenomena. And sometimes they're beautiful and fascinating, and you can spend a lot of time trying to kind of comprehend the whole structure. But in the end, like, you're just playing with concepts. Playing chess with concepts was how I viewed it at the time. And I didn't really want to play games like that, just play chess. And so at one point, I kind of had enough of philosophy. I managed to get through it so that I finished my bachelor's degree. But already, as I was finishing it, I knew that, okay, I'm not going to pursue this further. But then I had no idea, what to do next. And it was actually like a meditative experience that, well, I wouldn't say guided. It prompted me to take some action, but I'm not sure if it was the right thing, like that, if I understood it correctly. But what happened was that I was with a friend. We had smoked some weed, and out of nowhere, I felt this like other presence, like this very gentle, very loving, feminine presence well up in me. And I had experiences like that before, just these spontaneous meditative experiences that felt very different from from most of my meditations. And they usually happen spontaneously, like I wasn't practicing, and then suddenly everything lit up, things became clear, like mind became very joyous, but it always felt like there was some other presence there. If I say I heard a voice, that doesn't mean I literally heard a voice, but something said inside me that, you know what to do. Because I was, figuring out, well, like, what the hell do I do now that I'm done with philosophy? And so it said, you know what to do. You have to help all beings, or you have to help beings. You have to help others, or something along that formulation. And so that was perfectly clear in the moment. It drove me to try to find some way that I could help others. And back then, so I had this basis of yoga practice. So I figured, okay, so this is what has worked best for me. So maybe I should pursue something along the lines of, teaching yoga or teaching some physical health. So I did manage to get into physiotherapy or physical therapy as a study program at the university. I was really enthusiastic at first. I was having this, like, I know where I'm going now again. Well, things are moving in the right direction. And I was also very interested in, the physical body and learning these things. But then I found myself, in a class where most of the people were much younger than myself. So they came straight out of high school. They had completely different interests. And instead of reading to understand something, you were just basically reading to learn it by heart. So, anatomy, all of that stuff, and you just had to. And I know that, there's no other way than actually learning those kind of things by heart. But it really doesn't work for me personally. I'm really bad at that kind of, or keeping the motivation up to get through all those boring parts. I started sinking into like this depression and frustration, and it ended with me just spontaneously thinking that I should just travel. I should just quit the studies, quit everything, and I should just travel. Like, there was this allure of the freedom of the nomad that was calling me. I had been drinking, and I had this idea that, okay, travel it is. And the whole hitchhiking trip was kind of marked by the fact that I was escaping something. Like, I was trying to get away from these responsibilities, like everything that I was failing at. I was trying to get rid of by removing myself physically from it. And so I was pushing myself all the way. I was hitchhiking middle of the winter, middle of the dark season, as I live quite far north, and just pushing, cold, trying to get somewhere. And I didn't have any plan for where that was. Well, it basically became more and more miserable. It didn't live up to the expectations at all for this free life of a nomad, And so eventually ended up having this kind of like physical, mental, emotional breakdown in Eastern Germany, where it became apparent that, I physically couldn't go on. I had frostbite on my fingers, losing weight because I wasn't eating enough. I looked very sick because I was drinking enough, but I wasn't drinking water. And from an emotional and mental perspective as well, I couldn't deal with it anymore. So I lay down in my tent. I put my tent up and I just laid down, or nothing had prepared me for the situation I was in, completely alone and completely having no idea of what to do or where to go. Because everything was kind of up to me at that point. There wasn't anything else to guide. After lying there for a few hours, I got up, started packing my things, and found a farm. This was Eastern Germany. I found a farm diagonally in the opposite direction in the southwest corner, well, where I could live and eat for free while providing my working at the farm. Yeah, and so I stayed there for a while, maybe three weeks. Wasn't a particularly good stay in the sense that I didn't get along with a farmer. He was going through his own emotional issues because his wife had died 11 months prior. He was going blind, slowly going blind, and so everything was kind of like he was in a position where he soon would have to sell the farm. So everything was kind of collapsing in his life. Everything was kind of collapsing in my life. And we both had a similar kind of anger response to it. Very volatile. We did have good moments, but most of the time we were just clashing or avoiding each other. So I spent most of the time there at the farm meditating, just sitting. It had become clear to me that it didn't work to run away from the problems. And so the option that I found, the alternative, was to sit and watch the problems. So that's what I did without, using any specific technique that I had read about. I was just sitting and I was just watching my thoughts because I figured, okay, so my thoughts aren't a very nice, like my head isn't a very nice place at the moment. The thoughts are quite grim and ugly, and so I better just watch them, see what this is all about. And I think that I worked up to something like 3 hours a day, which for me was I'd never been to a retreat before, and it started having an effect, like taking the edge off of the baggage or the suffering that I was experiencing. And importantly, it gave me these glimpses, like suddenly everything dropped away of these problems. So that, okay, so if you increase the amount of meditation, you increase the likelihood of these glimpses taking place. Before that, I had thought that it had seemed kind of random, like these things just happened when I wasn't expecting it. So I made that connection, and during that stay, I figured out what I was going to do with my life. It was, dedicating myself to meditation and teaching also meditation, although that decision was a bit premature. That was a clear thought that I had, like I'm going to actually teach this in relation to that helping others message that you could say that I received. So once I was able to leave that farm, I went back to Norway and I started studying meditation more seriously. I eventually registered for a proper retreat at one of Goenka's retreat centers in the UK. And I didn't know what to expect. Like I just had this feeling, I'm going to finish it. Like there's no way I'm going to leave. Because I had heard, about it's very tough. This Goenka Vipassana retreats are known to be quite tough, and they're not really that beginner friendly looking back. I don't think that I would recommend the beginners to go to such an intensive retreat. But it worked for me, and I think partly was because I was just determined that there's no way I'm going to leave. And so what you do there is that the first few days you spend just watching the breath. So uh, bringing your concentration levels up to the point of access concentration. Access concentration is where you can quite easily, well, you have enough concentrated power to kind of easily investigate or really feel into kind of the subtleties of the body and phenomena. So they establish this access concentration, and then from there on, the next so first 3.5 days, so the next 6.5 days were just spent scanning the body, just scanning, and I soon, started feeling the effects of. So it's 10 hours a day for 10 days, and just I think like within a few days, I was feeling like, oh, something's something's happening, like something's deepening here, and it felt really good. It felt very concrete. That again, I had had experiences with meditation that proved that there was something real about it. I had made the connection that if you meditate more, you increase the likelihood of having meaningful experiences occur. But here I saw it very systematically that how the practice deepened from day to day, and combined with so there are daily talks, recorded talks by Goenka, who is passed away. Like the practice together with these talks, I realized that, oh, there's like a pattern to this, because otherwise this person couldn't be talking as if he was reading my mind, because the exact steps that he were describing would happen. So again, it kind of impressed on me this like scientific, like there's a pattern here that can be mapped, like there or known or studied. And it also gave me it made my practice strong enough to become a daily habit. Like going back to sitting once a day or twice a day from sitting 10 hours a day was very easy. And so it kind of established a daily practice this was late or autumn 2015. And after that, coming back, again, I thought that I had found, like I'm going to devote myself to this. I was planning my next retreat. I was sitting the 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the evening that is recommended. But soon again, I started feeling like, is it really like a complete, or like something's not complete, or whatever I was thinking, something along those lines. And so I again started searching for something that would include more aspects than just scanning the body. It didn't feel like scanning the body would lead to everything that was promised or lead to also those spontaneous experiences that I had, like of complete freedom. And it was at this point I really started thinking about, becoming a monk, finding like an ashram in India or somewhere where I could devote all my time to practice. But fortunately, I then found Amrita Mandala. I found the two-part formula in a forum post, so I didn't have to. I didn't have to go to India, because as soon as I saw the post, which included the headline was "Awakening is not an accident anymore," immediately caught my interest. Started reading, and it included the full description of the practice, and it just made sense. Like, as I said, I'd listened a lot to Eckhart Tolle, so he was kind of like the one that I had found that spoke the clearest and spoke the most, you could also say, about this awakening phenomena. And so when I read through the two-part formula, I was recognizing, like here's like a structured this is the basic structure that everybody's talking about. This is that openness. So two-part formula, which is our practice for what we call spiritual awakening or initial awakening. I'll get back to what that means, but the way that it is practiced, it has two steps. One, you recognize openness. You recognize lack of contraction in your mind, in your body, and you keep relaxing into that to reveal this spaciousness or this freedom experientially. And from there on, you actively bring up the feeling of being a me, being a separate self, a separate person, or like separate personhood. Well, being a separate person, being a separate self that is experiencing, the external world, that is experiencing other people, that is experiencing good thoughts, bad thoughts, good emotions, bad emotions, and so on. The central feeling of me. You bring that actively out, and by going back and forth between openness and contraction in a systematic way, you deconstruct that contraction. You allow it to release permanently, so that the distinction collapses between the two modes. So I recognized, by reading that, oh, this might actually work. And I was getting this vibe. There was doubt in my mind because I wanted to find it so much that I was kind of hesitant, well, like there was this doubt that it might not work, or if it works, then maybe it wouldn't work for me, and all kinds of thoughts like this that went through my mind. But the foundational feeling was that, okay, so I think I might have found it. And so I contacted then Baba, who had posted the method in that forum, Amrita Baba, who is the founder of Amrita Mandala, who is my teacher, your teacher. I contacted him and scheduled a guidance to awakening, which is the format, which I now know is the format that we use to guide people through the process of investigating the separate self in order to reveal the emptiness of that self, the empty nature of it. And so here, what I mean by self is not personality. It is not thought, it is not emotion, it is not any particular of the phenomena that we experience. But what self means is that this context is this structure that is added to various phenomena that we experience, whether it is this basic feeling of me, or whether it is a thought or emotion. There is this structure that kind of attaches itself onto it and makes it solid, makes it appear solid, makes it appear like, for example, this physical body. When we close our eyes, it still feels physical, like it still feels like kind of limited, and it has a certain shape and all of that. And same with this, same with, anger, for example. When we experience anger, it has this contracting power, like it manifests itself as something substantial. This contracting power is what we call self in general. That me being an example of such a self, such a contraction that places itself in the place of direct experience. It's kind of like a filter that we experience reality through. And emptiness means lack of that structure. When we experience ourselves, when we experience our thoughts, when we experience what we call the external world, seeing, hearing, without such a solid structure to it, but as a direct experience, as a direct knowing, you could say, like the experience isn't, there's not the thing experienced here, and there is the me here that is experiencing it, but rather it's just this kind of spontaneous experience in itself, without such a me, without such an object, like a solid nature. And that lack of contraction is what we call emptiness, just to clarify that.
So this is quite distinct from the Goenka Vipassana, in the sense that we ourselves conjure up the energetic charge of the self by chanting me, I, mine. And in a sense, that sort of brings that contraction about. And we can viscerally observe it in our experience. And as we continue to do that over time, then this contraction seems to center itself to this point behind the eyes. So I was thinking how actually there was a few similarities of my path leading to this point of discovering the two-part formula. I remember reading about Vipassana in Matthew Ricard's book, and then I printed out for myself and put the instructions next to me of Goenka. I kept reading them over and over, and sort of I didn't understand how that would free you. Well, I actually practiced the 6-element practice, which was to observe yourself, observe earth, water, fire, air, space, consciousness, and notice how earth is here, earth is out there, water is here, water is out there, air comes in, air goes out. At which point do you notice that it becomes you, or that it becomes the environment? Very easy to do with heat. We're continuously exchanging heat. The space here, if I move here, well, that space isn't mine anymore. And then consciousness, it's the analogy is like a dewdrop on a leaf. We think we're that dewdrop, but when that drop drops into the ocean, which part of that is us? And so I practiced that, and that started to make more sense to me as I practiced it, because the whole point was to feel the heat, feel the solidity inside you. But there was something that still didn't make sense, and I was still very confused. But coming across the actual written text of the two-part formula, it made total sense off the bat to me, and it made it very easy to throw myself at it and give it a go.
Yeah. So this was my experience too, was that it kind of pointed to something that hadn't been clearly formulated in the previous methods that I had come across. And for one, I was specifically seeking awakening, insight into the empty nature of this central me, as described, first described to me by Eckhart Tolle and later described by other teachers. So this, in retrospect, I can see that all the practices I picked up, they didn't address this feeling of me. They weren't really designed to bring about any insight into it.
You were pointing out that you're scanning the object self. You're continuously going around the object self. But I know Mahasi Sayadaw does have some sort of references to the center, but it doesn't create that energetic charge that you can viscerally feel. It's still mostly objective. But you've said before that Vipassana, or your experience of Goenka Vipassana, is it's purely object self. It doesn't turn the mirror back directly onto this subject self.
Yeah. So maybe we should mention what you mean here by object self, because in our system, in Amrita Mandala, we present the totality of this selfing mechanism that we call it, this structure that replaces direct experience by filtering through this network of various selves of contractions. And to this totality of the selfing mechanism, we identify 3 distinct categories of selves. First one being the subject, the me, usually people point, toward behind their eyes. This is what we have been talking about now in relation to two-part formula, and it's what is seen through at the moment of initial awakening. And then, but object selves are are different in that they are not a subject. They are emotions, thoughts, various sensations experienced as solid. So when we have that, when we experience the contracting power of an emotion, that's an object self. That contraction is an object self. And in addition to this subject who is experiencing the various object selves, we have a third structure, which is, we call it substrate consciousness, and that one is different from the first and the subject self and the object self, in that it is much harder to experience as an object. Rather, it is as if you take a glass of water and then you just color the whole water, or kind of dull, like put some ash in it or something like this to make it not completely see-through. You could, there are many different ways to visualize it. Fogginess is a metaphor that is kind of fogging the whole experience. So for example, we wake up in the morning one day and it's just one of those days where everything feels dull, you don't want to do anything, no motivation, but you cannot point to, some specific area where the problem is located. It just fills the whole damn thing. So the extreme version of this is depression, where it just sucks the life force out of you, this substrate consciousness. And in the other end of the scale, you have this gross bliss, where the whole experiential field is filled with this unstable, like woo kind of energy, where everybody who has drunk alcohol has experienced it or seen. People drink alcohol, they see this kind of like unstable euphoria. And that's also substrate consciousness. So we have these three categories, and the first one is dealt with two-part formula. And yes, when I learned about these different aspects of the self, that it's not just one method fits all, I realized that most of the practices, or all of the practices I had been doing up to that point, including Goenka Vipassana of simply scanning the body, was working on the level of object selves. It was, well, with Goenka Vipassana, it's basically kind of within the body space. So whatever you encounter there, but you don't stick with anything. You don't examine anything. You just keep scanning. And yeah, so it's kind of like, it's a little bit hard also to explore these object selves. It seems like there's a different mechanism going on where you just keep scanning, and then there's more and more pressure. So there are longer sits that you just have to sit absolutely still. You can't get up. And this whole pressure situation causes emotions to come up. And since you're constantly scanning, the idea is that it's supposed to release. But the only reference throughout those 10 days to awakening, or to any permanent shifts taking place, because that's what awakening is. It's permanent shift, not just a gradual, but it's a watershed moment where something falls off or drops off and it doesn't come back again. The only reference to that was when Goenka, in one of his recorded videos, said that, I think he used the term nirvana, like something along the lines of, what about nirvana? Well, we don't have to worry about that. It comes when it, those things take care of themselves. We just continue to do the method, which is a very standard way of looking at it.
Yeah, this idea that it just happens by accident at some point.
Yeah, and which is exactly why the title Awakening is not an accident anymore. Is like it really coins or it really highlights an issue in, well, a lot of people's thinking, if not most spiritual teachers, their thinking is that this is an accident. You don't have to worry about it. Just leave it. And I remember I went to a it was a retreat at a Tibetan retreat center in the UK, and it was this quite famous Western teacher who was teaching. And uh, at one point, I can't remember exactly how it was brought up, but somebody brought up awakening. And then the answer was like, as always, you don't have to worry about that. Just keep looking into the mind and it will take care of itself. And so I couldn't help it but to comment on that reply, because this was after I had awakened myself. I had seen that, oh, well, you can actually, I mean, it's actually quite beneficial to address it directly and not just wait and hope for the best and continue doing something that isn't designed to make it happen. And so I commented and I got some kind of response that wasn't satisfactory. And so I pushed it further and I said, but the Buddha is always talking about it. So, why shouldn't we? Something along those lines. Like he seemed to think that it was important. So why aren't we, addressing it properly? To which, the teacher had enough. You could clearly tell that he was kind of getting annoyed and he was saying like, you're very obsessed with this awakening thing, aren't you? Or something like the fact that you have awakened, kind of hinting towards that it was pride or something like this. So kind of shutting it down in a way that wasn't completely like it wasn't savage or anything like this, but it was kind of insincere in a way, like clearly just wanted to end the whole discussion, felt uncomfortable about it.
So it's not that these practices can't lead to awakening at some point. It's just not as precise a tool as they can be because they're purely focused on the object self. And of course, even Eckhart Tolle himself, he describes in his awakening that he suddenly realized that he was saying to himself that I am useless, I want to die, or something like this. And then he realized there's two of him, and that seemed to take him to this self, or who is this self that's saying that they don't want to live anymore. So we've got people in our Sangha who've awakened spontaneously, some who've perhaps awakened by other methods as well. So it's not that it can't happen by these methods, but here we have a precise and tested tool, as it were, that opens you up to this illusion, like witnessing a magician's trick, and first you just believe in this trick, but then the magician shows you how it's done, and the trick doesn't fool you at all anymore. So this is the sense of falling away, perhaps, that you're talking about.
Yeah, in relation to that first, or that subject self, yeah. It's what I'm talking about. And sure, yes, awakening can happen spontaneously. It can happen by accident, that's for sure. People who have never encountered spiritual teachings might awaken. But the opposite side of that is people dedicating their lives to meditation and not awakening, like 30, 40, 50 years later, they're still not hitting it, because there is no guarantee that it will work if you go by accident alone. And the reason why the two-part formula works is that it is a formulation of the very mechanism of what awakening is. Like whether the awakening is spontaneous, whether some method that is not two-part formula is used, or whether two-part formula is used, when awakening happens, it always happens by the same mechanism. It is always this small contracted me that is seen in the context of this lack of contraction, this openness. And this is what makes this contraction open by itself. That you see that, oh shit, there's something like there's an alternative to this contraction, you know, and you see it very clearly and you experience it, feel it deeply. And this is always the mechanism, whether it's consciously recognized or not. It's the mechanism of awakening. And so the reason why two-part formula works is because it's the most precise, condensed description of those two mechanisms put into practice. So it will work for, you know, everyone who applies it properly will awaken by it. Like there's no other way. It's like a mechanical process. And many people kind of react when if I talk, you know, online or wherever about this and mention that it's a mechanical process, it seems that they kind of react to it. I think it's the way I see it, we are kind of, and I was too, conditioned to think of awakening in certain ways. And I think most of it is just ignorance. People are just repeating whatever some other person said about awakening without having first-hand experience with it. That's a lot of it. And you also have awakened people who fail to understand the mechanism of what happened to them, and thus kind of rely on, they kind of see what worked for them, or if it was by accident, then it's always by accident. And, you know, these kind of like, it's faulty thinking, but it's very easy that it happens. And I've, you know, made all these mistakes myself, so I'm not, you know, pointing fingers here. But it's just a fact that it's this, what awakening is and how you achieve it is so covered. It's so like under layer and layer of confusion and conditioned thinking, when in reality, it is so simple. It's very simple stuff. And I've done maybe close to 30 guidances myself the past few years. And, you know, at this point, it's very easy to see where people are at, because I've seen it before. There's very little new happening once you get past the first 10, 15 guidances. It's very much like a predictable process that is kind of like easy to understand. You start like as a guide, you start just feeling into the energy of the person where they are at. And of course, you know, should mention that the way that we also verify awakenings in Amrita Mandala is through picture analysis, what we call Bhumi analysis. I'll get back to what Bhumi means, but for now we simply look into the eyes, or look into the eyes face and feel into the energy that is being transmitted from that person. And you use your own body to feel it, kind of relaxing into that, allowing the energy to reach your own mind, and so that you may experience it. And with practice, it becomes easy to pick up the vibe of awakening, whether awakening has happened or not. Sometimes, you know, there are even visual cues, because what we're talking about here is the contraction behind the eyes when it releases. That's also what you feel into when verifying it. But sometimes it's kind of funny, because you see that the whole expression, it almost seems like the eyes are kind of widening and the forehead gets smoother and the mouth is not tight. And it's like this, everything was kind of pulled towards this center behind the eyes, and then it just releases and the face falls back to where it's supposed to be. Yeah.
So I wonder, I've seen people caught on this description of mechanical, perhaps because what we're looking for is that which is not mechanical. Our Buddha nature is this open, natural flow of life, as it were, which is part of the meditation. Any meditation using the two modes that we're describing here, we rest as best we can in this open naturalness, and we're looking for the unnaturalness of the self, this cocoon, as to borrow Shane's description, this cocoon we've created for ourselves of a self which separates us from everything else. It's that's mechanical, and that we can hammer away at, as it were.
Yeah, so it's different use of like different kind of metaphorical use of the words mechanical then in the two cases. So I'm just describing that there's a clear pattern. So because, well, the thing is that this openness of mind, the selfless mode, it's not chaotic. It's not like it's just random, like no, like that wouldn't be, that's not it. That's not the opposite to rigidness. It's not complete chaos. I would say the feeling of when you recognize it is that things fall in order. So it's not like, it's quite opposite of chaos. It's very simple, ordinary, but orderly, also sober. But yeah, I know that this is like a common, it's a common, I would say, misunderstanding that everyone's path is completely different. And it's just, there are no patterns to anything like internal, like subjective experiences are just completely random. But if that was the case, then you wouldn't have, for example, psychology. Psychology as a, well, it's not strictly a science, it's an art as well, but you just wouldn't have it because you wouldn't be able to describe any patterns of behavior or symptoms or anything. But these things do follow, concrete patterns. And the same is the case for awakening. So I'm not saying that it's not an organic process. I'm not saying that, you can describe it down to the minute detail exactly, what people feel and think and all of that and how they themselves experience it. But the awakening event and the principles that bring it about are very ordered, very, like, you can formulate them. And you can formulate them to such a degree of precision that formulation, such as the two-part formula, will work every single time it's properly applied.
Do you think when it happens by accident, I've heard quite a few stories of spontaneous awakenings, and there's always some intense, emotionally charged thing going on, which seems to face the self against the self. Eckhart Tolle's being a famous one. And then maybe it can happen through the Vipassana, Goenka, because you were saying, like, being there for hours on end, it creates an emotional charge. So at some point you've looked through everything that you can see, and maybe just what's left in the center, this contraction, you can't help but see it. And that perhaps seems to happen occasionally as well.
Occasionally, but I don't think it's correct to say that you can't help but, because can't help but see it. I think it's like the most likely scenario is that you won't see it. It's just the thing that there is not much left doesn't automatically make you flip the gaze 180 degrees and look directly back. You just continue to look, like, outwards, to put it metaphorically, and just experience that as empty, and you might get all kinds of ideas of being further along the path than you are, because you just can't find anything anymore.
That's the samsaric state in itself, that we look outside to our problems, as it were. So we continue to do that unless we have these specific instructions that say we should focus directly back.
Yes, but I also mean that, for example, if you practice some practice that it's still working internally, even though it's like working with these object selves. So it's not like you're seeking outside of yourself. But if you practice that for a while, you might come to a state where things seem very calm, and if you're practicing also, shamatha, like calming meditations, these two together, it might create instances where you feel like things are very smooth and very open, and like you're very, like you feel like a Buddha, you know, when in fact you haven't really, like you haven't deconstructed anything permanently. You haven't weeded out the root of the structure, the I, the root of the problem. And because you haven't rooted out the root, you can't get to the rest of it. Because here's an important thing, is that in order for any subsequent awakenings into the emptiness of, say, the object selves, and subsequent awakenings into the emptiness of substrate consciousness, so deconstruction of the whole selfing mechanism, for those subsequent awakenings to take place, you need the first awakening. Like, there's just no way you can jump over the first awakening and go straight to the second, third, fourth. And so this is part of our path map that I'm describing here, that we speak of many awakenings, primarily then concerned with these three categories of selfing. And this path map of ours it revolves around 13 energy centers in our energy body. So if we can speak of a physical body, and then we can speak of energy bodies, which are not physical. We can see them as we see the physical body, but we can learn to feel into them. And just like with, I was saying, with awakening, there are patterns, there is a structure to this, and we can learn to feel into that structure. And while in various traditions, this structure is represented a little bit differently. So, you know, in some you speak of this and that many chakras in the body, or that many channels that connects these energy centers, the chakras, while there are these superficial differences in the relative representation of the energy body, the energy body itself is the same for all beings. That structure that we can reveal. It's just we use a model to get to that experience, and that model might vary a little bit. It also depends, you know, what is the basis of the model. For example, if we have stages of the path, one way to map that out is to write descriptions for each stage. And those methods, or those path maps that are based on descriptions, vary a lot. So they're talking about the same stages, but just like any author or any two authors wouldn't write the exact same book, they formulate themselves very differently, because we're on a relative level here. But the way that the 13 Bhumi model, which is the name of our path map, that is based on 13 energy centers that are merely pointed out. So they're put into a model. Like, for example, right behind the eyes is the first Bhumi. So we can point to that. We can put it into a model, a visual representation, print it on paper. Above that, like about a centimeter, is the next one. And so it follows up here from first to the top of the skull, the sixth Bhumi. Those are the first 6 Bhumis, first 6 grounds, which is the literal translation of Bhumi. Ground as in foundational, like the ground, the earth, meaning that once we have opened new ground, we are standing steadily there. It's a permanent shift. So 6 Bhumis from behind the eyes to the top of the skull, and then above the head, 4 more Bhumis that are associated with these layers that I talked about, this fogginess, substrate consciousness. And above there again, there are 3 more Bhumis that are always perfectly clear, that are related to the qualities of our true nature. So first one, related to subject self. Second to sixth, related to more gross emotions, object selves. And 4 above there, related to substrate consciousness, subtle mind states, and then finally, when we pierce through the whole pillar, we get to the enlightened qualities of our own mind in the 11th, 12th, and 13th centers. And so we can visualize them as centers, we can feel them as centers, but we can also, feel them as layers of this selfing mechanism. And when we open the first one, when we awaken, have an initial awakening, we hollow out the center of the whole structure. And so this reveals this empty space in the middle of it. We might have had glimpses of emptiness before, temporary glimpses, but now it's like in the middle of this structure, in the middle of our own experience, we have permanent access to this incomplete but permanent openness. And this allows us then to deconstruct the layer, next layer, next layer, next layer, next layer. And yes, the benefit of then using the energy body in this way is that instead of descriptions, for example, is that everybody can sit down and they can start feeling into it, and they can learn to distinguish the various feeling tones in those layers.
I think of it a little bit like anatomy. When you learnt the anatomy of the inside of your body, you can begin to feel, oh, perhaps that's my liver over there, this is my stomach over here, I can feel my lungs inflating. It was kind of a similar experience for me. When we're sort of informed of these energy centers, we can begin very slowly, in my case, to become aware that there's some kind of plate and this energy field, and gradually it becomes a little bit more accurate, your feeling of these as you look up. That was a very good description of the Bhumi model, I think. And so you're describing, when we open this first Bhumi, it's an entry into the non-dual path, but perhaps you wouldn't describe this as there's no stability of Buddhanature yet. You've just had a glimpse, perhaps. You've witnessed in some kind of way the non-dual nature of reality. So there's something subtle that's stabilized in your experience, but you haven't stabilized in your Buddhanature yet.
Yeah, exactly. So I can go back to then my own awakening. So I mentioned that I went through the guidance with Baba, where like the structure of the guidance is that, well, when I did it, me as the one being guided was to apply the two-part formula daily, at least twice, 30 minutes twice a day, alternating between the two modes, and then kind of like reporting back my own discoveries, my own observations to Baba the guide. And then he would then kind of feel where I was at and point me in the right direction, so that, going back and forth like this. And it took about 5 days since I started the guidance until awakening happened. And the way that it happened, it's kind of funny, because I was an addict at the time. I was smoking weed, I was drinking alcohol, but I had kind of decided that, okay, I'm going to take this seriously. I'm going to stay away from everything while I do this guidance. And I managed to do that from the Monday to the Friday. But on Friday, I did smoke some weed. And then I figured, okay, fuck, now I can't process, now I screwed up. And then I thought, well, I can still, maybe it doesn't interfere, And so I sat down, and it very soon happened that I felt the tension. At this point, it wasn't just a tension, but it was a radiating ball, like energetic ball, this self. So I felt it very clearly. I was able to go deep into it, to the point where it kind of, like, I was sucked into it. There were some other energetics, like stuff going up, but this main thing was that I was kind of sucked into this point behind the eyes. I remember also at one point it went above the head, and after this one pointedness that maybe lasted for a minute or so, it kind of just shattered, like the center behind the eyes just exploded again, or shattered like glass. And so I kind of like, okay, that was energetic, like something like that was interesting. But I didn't notice anything until I got up, went to the toilet, and as I was standing there, I noticed that, there's something very subtly different here. Like the sound, uh, the sound of the urine hitting the water was different. Like the wind outside is kind of like difficult to tell exactly where that sound is or something along those lines. And I realized that, oh, okay, so I have no idea then where this awareness, there's no central point or central origin of awareness anymore. But this initial clarity, so it was very much open, but this initial clarity faded as the remaining parts of the selfing mechanism became more evident. So you have to keep in mind that this whole network of object selves and subtle mind states, it can be so dense that even if you kind of just remove this tiny contraction in the center, it's not like you have permanent access to the totality of what the non-dual state is. You see the emptiness of I, but you don't see the emptiness of your entire mind, which is non-dual. Like that's non-duality is when all of these structures are released. So it's a very incomplete awakening, even though it's like mandatory for further awakenings to happen. So this is why I say that you open the non-dual path, but it's not like you establish non-duality. It's not stable at all. And in fact, Hakuin, Zen Master Hakuin said something along the lines of, like, Wild Ivy is his autobiography. He opens it by saying something along the lines of, even though you open the path of non-duality, meaning awakening, unless you have the mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta, or heart mind of enlightenment, care for all beings, if you don't have the mind of enlightenment, you will still sink back into the paths of evil, or sink back into the paths of evil, or something like this. And so it's much more subtle than perhaps, what figures like Eckhart Tolle, the way that they speak of it. It's true, everything they say, but it's not usually that comprehensive. It's not like it's that clear all the time that you're just free of all like your habitual ways. Not at all. In my experience, most of it was there still. And it was quite a surprise after a few days when I had this kind of honeymoon clarity period. And after a few days, it kind of started going back. So it didn't fully close up, but it wasn't as clear as it was. And I started feeling like, okay, so I still have these addictions going on. I still have these habitual thinking patterns, and everything was still intact except for that center point, which then made all the difference.
So this is entry into the non-dual path, is how we're describing it here. But would you also describe it as it's entry into the tantric path, as in it makes the tantric path possible after awakening?
I think that one might be able to, well, I know that people can sense energies without being awakened, but like if the purpose is to realize our innate potential, realize the nature of our minds completely, which is the goal of Tantra, then the starting point is emptiness into the nature of me. That's the starting point of Tantra as well. It's the starting point of any practice that leads to non-dual, like a non-dual realization.
Because this is when it goes beyond the philosophy now. It's not an abstract idea, but we have some visceral sense in reality, in our own direct experience of this non-dual nature.
Mm. Yeah, it's the first permanent step. So it's the first permanent taste that one has. I remember that before awakening, as I've already said, I had these experiences where my mind just seemed to drop off temporarily. Like later, I learned to call them cessations, or I learned that they are a thing. Other people experience them too, and they are called cessations, meaning that like cessation meaning that there's a temporal kind of complete dropping off of the mind, so that for the duration of the cessation you're actually experiencing your own Buddhahood, but it's not realizing Buddhahood, but it's like a temporal experience of it. But those don't have the same effect. Those temporal experiences, they do not have, like they can be highly motivating and they have their own value, and like a path wouldn't be complete without them, to put it like that. But it's the permanent, like temporal experiences cannot be a goal, but permanent realization can and should be the goal of practice, because it is the goal. It is the whole purpose of the practice, is to permanently, reveal the final realization that is completely non-dual on the level of the mind and on the level of the body.
So then the next stage, you discovered the Amrita Mandala practices. Do you want to say how you came into that? You had a little rest from things, didn't you? And you started Guru Yoga, the basic version of it.
Yeah. So right after the awakening, I was kind of I was kind of just exploring this new everyday life, basically, because there was a shift, and I was enjoying it, and I was very happy that I'd finally, it was a long chapter that seemed like had closed, this whole seeking thing. I've been actively seeking awakening for so long, and here it is. Where do I go from here? And I knew there was more. I had already read, there was more. I of course, like everybody else, have to kind of experience. I had to experience for myself how much there was left in order to kind of, because you kind of have, usually there's this impression that awakening is much, much more, or it's something else than it is in reality. But anyways, I was kind of enjoying that for a while, didn't feel like practicing anything in particular. So I'm talking like just a few weeks. But I knew of the tantric practices that Baba, my now teacher, was offering. And and I had read about it, and it kind of like, I felt the vibe of it, that this sounds interesting. It's like there might be something here, and I knew that I was eventually going to pick it up. I just didn't have any hurry with it. But then at one point, Baba arranged this online introductory session for a few. There were kind of like, along with myself, there were a few other international students. I think most of the teaching activities back then were in Finland, and so anyways, it was arranged this international, like, introductory session for international students, and I attended that one and was introduced to Guru Yoga. And I could feel, I think, from the first session that it filled something, like it filled some want, something that had been lacking in my practice up until that point. And what it was that filled that role was the guru principle. So this practice that I was introduced to it's called Guru Yoga, which means, I guess you can translate it as union with the inner teacher. And the way that it is practiced, so like an example of a guru is, for example, behind me here is Guru Rinpoche, and up there I have several guru figures, historical masters who attained the full realization. It doesn't have to be historical masters, it can be contemporary, but the point is that they are beings that have fully realized the nature of mind. And so the secret, the open secret of Tantra is that this attainment of masters, this enlightened mind of masters, of gurus, is available to anyone regardless of time and space. So whether the master lived 2,000 years ago or whether they are alive in a physical body today, just doesn't matter. The blessing, the experience of their attainment is available to anyone. And it also, distance in time, in space doesn't matter either. You can practice it anywhere in your own meditation. And the way that it is done is that you use some kind of external practice, like a mantra or a visualization. You could visualize. In the case of visualization, you can visualize yourself as the guru, whether it's Guru Rinpoche like here, or whether it's some other guru. You can just visualize your own body, or in the case of mantra, you can repeat the mantra. In the case of Guru Rinpoche, it would be Namo Guru Rinpoche. Namo meaning bows or bowing to, greetings to Guru Rinpoche. And by using that external tool, you are able to generate an experience, or able to generate the energy, the enlightened mind of that guru within your own body mind. So then we have moved from what is called the outer aspect of the practice to the inner realm of the practice, which is the direct experience of the energies, the energetic qualities of the mind of the particular guru. And this inner realm is what Tantra is all about. Like, that is the essence of Tantra, or that is what separates the tantric practices from so-called sutric practices, is that the emphasis is on the internal, whereas with sutra, or exoteric practices, the emphasis is on the outer, the practicing different forms of practices. And so it's not like sutra doesn't have blessings or doesn't have inner experience, but it's that in Tantra, in the esoteric paths, it is the path. Like, it is the main focus on the path. But these two together, so Tantra of course has outer practices, but these two together, using, say, a mantra, external form, to contact the inner form of the blessing, the direct experience of the energetic qualities of the minds of the guru, leads to the innermost or secret level of the practice, which is the realization that the guru's mind is the very same as your own. That these qualities that you are experiencing are not external. This compassion, if that's the thing you're experiencing, if this warmth, this clarity, this stable, like, feeling of kind of power, it is not external in any way, but are qualities of your own mind. And so that's how the Guru Yoga practice works. And from the first session, I realized that, this guru, like, I realized that I had been longing for somewhere to channel my devotion. It felt like it just filled that role perfectly. Like, now I had a spiritual ideal. I had basically somebody to hang out with in practice, because that's how it feels. You hang out, and it's not just anyone, but it's an actual enlightened being. and you can feel that, and you can study the enlightenment of their enlightenment in your own body and mind. And at the time, there were no online empowerments, and so I was kind of stuck, again, for those listening, I'm using quotation marks, stuck with guru yoga practice for a few months before I had the chance to receive empowerment in Rainbow Body Yoga, which is our main post-awakening purification practice. And what that did, like that was very fortunate, I think. I think it was a blessing that I wasn't able to jump too quickly into more complex forms of practice, because it really established, it allowed me to establish the relationship to guru, as in the principle of guru, but also the various gurus. So at the time, my main practice was, and the main guru of Amrita Mandala was a lady master called Machi Glabdron, famous for her lineage of Chöd, or like I don't know how to translate it, but it's a like form of tantric practice. I don't want to go into details. But as soon as I started my daily practice with her, the practice progressed like nothing else up until that point. So for example, before taking up guru yoga practice, I was very fixated, like very rigid in my practice. So I had developed this habit of using a timer. So, but not just using a starting bell or an ending bell, but using interval bells to kind of guide me, to keep track of, where I was at in the practice. So when I first started practicing guru yoga, I would spend like half an hour programming this sequence lasting, say, the practice lasted for 40 minutes. And then based off of the description of the practice, the instructions that says, sit, for example, 1, sit down and relax into basic space, lasts 2 to 3 minutes. Then you go on to asking for a blessing and feeling the blessing, 1 to 2 minutes. And so I would take these minutes and I would program them into the app. And so I would just have bells go off all the time, kind of forcing me to jump through the practice in a very mechanical way, like
yeah.
but in the
me
bad.
Too. That sounds exactly like what I did. Did you use Insight Timer? That was the one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
At 3 minutes, 8 minutes, etc.
Yeah. But when I picked up after a few days, I kind of got the sense. So again, it wasn't like a voice telling me, but I got the sense like that Machi Glabdron in this case was just kind of laughing at the whole thing, like, what the hell are you doing? Like, stop it. Just stop it. Stop the time control fetish. And so I did I kind of skipped it. I think I just dropped the whole thing, like didn't use the timer at all. And the practice instantly became more organic. I was able to actually sit for as long as it takes to relax. So it was determined by the quality of the relaxation prompted me to move on, rather than this artificial pre-programmed bell going off.
That's how it was for me as well. It makes a big difference, doesn't it?
Yeah.
To go with the natural flow of it.
Yeah. That was a very big discovery for me. It's kind of like, in retrospect, it's obvious, but it really changed, my practice, made it more organic, made me rely more on my own intuition, which is a way to develop intuition and develop this kind of flexibility in your own practice, take ownership of the practice. And I had many such things that kind of fell in place. And it felt like I was being guided then by, like you could say, guided by the meditation, but specifically guided by Machi Glabdron and later on other gurus, as I discovered that I had a connection with other gurus as well. So I remember, for example, with Guru Rinpoche, I remember I was practicing with Mache Glabdron one day, and for some reason I didn't really feel like sitting at all. And so I did eventually buckle in and got up, tried to do something else, see if something else worked. So I started folding clothes or anything but but actually addressing the problem. I put on Mache Glabdron's mantra in the background. So I was listening to that, and then when it finished, there was auto play on YouTube, so it switched mantras automatically, and Guru Rinpoche's mantra came on. And as soon as I heard the words, first I just heard the devotion, like this timeless devotion of it was presented, like that kind of grew beyond the actual, just the melody, or I could feel something grander there, and I just started crying. And with that crying, all that tension kind of was released and was replaced by this peace, this very meaningful presence, feeling of presence. And I kind of recognized that it must have something to do with Guru Rinpoche, and so I contacted Baba about it, and he confirmed, that, right, so it seems that you have like a karmic connection with Guru Rinpoche, and kind of I said that was a very good thing, and that I could continue to practice with him as well. So I was then doing, 2 sessions a day, one with Mache Glabdron, one with Guru Rinpoche. And the first period was like that I was discovering these connections, and indeed it continued, it continued beyond. Also, when I learned Rainbow Body Yoga, I continued practicing Guru Yoga with different masters, and many of them I recognized as having that I'd been visited by them previously. So in such situations as I was describing earlier, with this like a lovely, loving presence tell me that I knew what I was supposed to do, that I was supposed to help other beings. In similar situations like that, I was able to connect like who was actually visiting me, and it kind of like made past experiences just fall into place conceptually. So I understood what had been happening. But it was very beneficial to practice Guru Yoga so deeply and have those months to devote myself to that practice, reestablishing relationships and kind of settling into it before receiving empowerment in 2-part form. In Rainbow Body Yoga.
It's lovely to hear how open you were to Tantra, considering you hadn't really come across it, definitely not experientially by the sounds of things. So this is your first experiential taste of it, and you seem to have just completely opened up to it. I mentioned it's lovely because it's quite a contrast to my experience of it, where at least for a good year and a half, I was just stuck in this whole, I want to believe it, but there's this critical mind, which obviously is important, but the critical mind was overbearing in a way, because I found it very difficult to notice these shifts going on as they happened. So I wasn't getting this experiential conviction of it until my 5th Bhumi, when that opened and I noticed it, and it opened up a lot more for me for a visceral sense of the blessings and to understand it, because this is something that can't be understood from a analytical, rational point of view, as it were. You have to dive in the waters and experience it for yourself to be able to critique it properly, because if you don't let yourself go into it and experience it yourself, there is no understanding of it in the first place.
No, I like, the feeling was that I was just ready for that practice at that point in time. Ready meaning that I had experienced clearly my own suffering, Like I knew how that was. I knew what would happen if I went in that direction. But I had also experienced that experienced lack of other methods. Like I had really tried, but they didn't bring the results that I felt I had been promised in the classical texts. Like it says there, you can fully realize this, achieve full liberation. It clearly says that in so many, like Tao Te Ching clearly states it, Avadhuta Gita clearly states it. All these texts that I had been exposing myself to or had been exposed to, they clearly said there's something real and permanent here that is supposed to. And I had experienced it as well in these cessations. This perfect, like up to like 20 minutes of just perfect mind, only for it to go away. So all of these factors combined made me ready for it. And I think also one important point was that I had then gone full circle with the whole philosophy thing and Western rational thinking, and just seeing that, okay, so that doesn't lead anywhere. Fulfilling. I mean, it's a wonderful tool, but it just doesn't lead anywhere. It's an endless circle. So these factors together made me ready to just try it. And because I had the feeling that it was working from the beginning, unlike anything else, two-part formula worked like just straight away, did exactly what it said. Then with Guru Yoga, from the first sessions, I was experiencing more than I had, consistently for any part of my path previously. And it just continued like that. And because I was throwing myself into the practice, like the results just came very, very easily in the beginning. And there's one point also with this, because it's not like I didn't experience doubt about like that I just accepted everything at face value. I did experience some doubt, and there were things that didn't fit with my current understanding, like back then, of my worldview. But what I did was that I came up with working hypothesis for myself. So, well, first of all, I took these things as hypothesis. And it was stated from the beginning that you don't have to believe in any of this, just kind of take it as a hypothesis and see whether it's true or not. But it comes back to this being ready for it, being ready to really try out in a sincere manner these practices.
Perhaps it was something that I formulated for myself, was this idea that we're accessing archetypal enlightened qualities within ourselves that maybe the gurus represent in different ways, and we're accessing, similar to Carl Jung's idea of archetypes, but we can access rather than just heroes and magicians and etc. We can actually access our own enlightened archetypes within ourselves, and that's helped me, and I think is quite useful for people in the early days, because the idea to think that it's real and this mystical thing is pretty hard to wrap your head around, but the ultimate realization is that it is us anyway, that we're not separate from this. So it made sense to me to do that.
Yeah, I did the same. Like I had a hard time. Well, I had a hard time to explain to myself how it's not, because real, that's then you have to go into what is real. But like where do the gurus exist, and all of like the kind of the details of that ontological view, that like how it exists, how it's real, I had a hard time with. But again, I did the same as you. Like I just viewed it as, like language models to guide the practice. And in many ways they are, and I still subscribe to that. It's just that certain experiences then suggests that, there's something deeper, some deeper intelligence going on here, and it feels very real. Like, but my point is that I didn't believe it. I was open for it to be true, and open for it to be working. And that was my main concern, was whether it was working or not. And then I kind of found my own explanations as I was practicing, put the practice and the experiences at the center, and allowed that to kind of reformulate my understanding. And that's what happens, is that, as you progress, you just open up new levels of understanding of it, of the practice, but it's not available unless you have the practice. It's a completely, like in the case of spiritual practice, and I would say in most areas of human endeavors, like theory cannot and should not be separated from praxis. The two go hand in hand. Theory is only there to guide the practice, and the practice is there to validate your understanding, experiential, like the experiential basis of the theoretical model. Test things, and then you have to be open to be wrong, and make kind of provisional, keep your understanding provisional. Like don't let it settle as the truth, until it's kind of like beyond any, in the case of spiritual realization, that truth is just self-evident once it reveals itself, and then then other relative truths become less important, and how you explain something. The point is that it works. And that's still what I find the most important. So there was the awakening, and then there was this period where I was getting into tantric practice, and it took about 3 months until that second awakening. After picking up the guru yoga practice, it took about 3 months until I had my second awakening, second Bhumi opening, in May 2016. And I just want to mention it because I find that a lot of people, even after awakening, they're kind of curious about, so what are these subsequent awakenings? Like how do we know that they are occurring? But the way that I experienced that, and those, like the later ones, the basis of it is just that it's the very same thing. Like it's just a little deeper every time. So there's this dropping off of something, and you experience this open clarity, this very ordinary, sober mind, and it only deepens from opening to opening. So I went through this. So I learned Rainbow Body Yoga then, and continued. Like the next third Bhumi opening happened the same day that I received empowerment into Rainbow Body Yoga, and then it continued every month after that, one Bhumi after another. And like the significant Bhumis, out of like those that stood out, in addition to the first one, of course, because it was the first one, number 6 was significant in that it seemed to be a greater, like some kind of new territory. It wasn't like radically different, but it was subtly different. And then after that, as you mentioned, the 11th. And this is, of course, because, well, the first one is the first one, opens up the path, but the 6th one is the last that is located inside the head. The last one that is associated with gross emotions, object selves, gross thoughts, emotions. And then with the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, you're working through these subtle layers, opening through those subtle layers. And with the 11th, what happened was that something bigger or more obvious dropped off, in the sense that it had felt like my mind had a border, a very concrete and distinct border prior to that 11th Bhumi opening, whereas after it was just open, like something just opened up that was more fundamental than this physical body. It was not just that the body was feeling open, but it was just this a subtle border that fell off. And with that falling off, there was very positive, like warm, kind of a loving dimension to the nature of mind that became more evident. And another thing that was significant was that there was then kind of like a permanent insight into non-duality, the non-dual nature of mind. It wasn't complete, but if we look at it from the pillars again, or we can also view them as plates on top of each other, these bhumis. What happens when you open the 11th is that you have then drilled a hole through the entire, like the center of the entire pillar of samsaric, or like dirty plates. And this then reveals like a breathing hole, a permanent breathing hole that is always open, directly from like your own, like opening a permanent breathing hole that leads directly to the nature of mind. So you have this kind of subtle energy available all the time. But it kind of like, I don't want to give the wrong impression here that it's because all the shit is still going on. With opening of bhumis, you just penetrate the center of it so that you kind of gain access to the next layer, next layer, next layer, until you drill all the way through, and then you have access to the nature of mind, but just through a very tiny hole. And this is why we separate between opening of bhumis and perfecting of bhumis. Opening of bhumis, drilling a hole through the center. Perfecting bhumis is kind of deconstructing the whole plate so that you reveal the totality of the emptiness of each layer. So you actually then permanently remove the selfing of that layer, not just tiny central part of that selfing. So yeah, no, 11th Bhumi was significant in that sense. I didn't mention it, but you also have to open 12th and 13th Bhumis to have opened like the whole range of the Bhumis included in the path map. These opening of these highest of the Bhumis that we call Mahasiddha Bhumis, it just reveals the flavor of like the qualities of the nature of mind more clearly. So for example, 12th Bhumi, it really brings this warmth, loving energy to the body, and similarly with 13th Bhumi, it just brings this warmth to the space around the body. And 11th, it brings clarity, like pure.
Exactly how you've described 6th and 11th and 12th and 13th. This is precisely my experience. I didn't know where I was sort of in terms of bhumis at the time until 6th kind of, well, 5th opened and I kind of thought that I might be at 6th, but then 6th opened and it's like, aha, okay, this is 6th. And similar thing with 11th, 12th, 13th. Bodhicitta, this wish for others to experience freedom, happiness, these are all the sort of feelings that come alive when this happens, and yeah, it's kind of this opening up, this edge that was always there keeping you closed in just subtly opens. It's nothing that dramatic, but it subtly opens. Maybe like you've got this thin tube. It was like you're living in dank water, but you've got a thin straw that you can just about breathe through to the fresh air at the top.
Yeah, it definitely lets the light in. And that makes all the difference for dealing with the remaining things. Because it seems that you can, and it happens to some that they move to one, and then they open one bhumi, and then they perfect it. And then they move to the next, and they perfect it. It's not very common in our Sangha. It has happened like occasionally with 1 or 2 bhumis that it perfects before going on. before opening the next one. But the benefit of going straight through all of them is that, yeah, you're still very much in the grips of samsara, of your own samsaric cyclic mind patterns, your own suffering, ignorance. But at the same time, you have this permanent breathing hole that brings light and clarity into the remaining chunks of darkness.
Yeah. My experience was it's always there. This awareness has opened up, and even in the thick of the darkness, somehow it's there or instantly available. You can just turn to it and it's instantly available to you, whereas it took a bit more searching before.
Yeah, definitely. And but for me also, when I moved on, and it's kind of interesting that, as I said, I moved very quickly through the opening of the Bhumis. But when I hit perfection stage of Bhumis, things significantly slowed down. So I said that, like, I've been thinking about why that happened, and we were talking about this readiness, that I was very ready for the tantric practice when it came into my life, and so the process was quite rapid. And I was kind of floating on this, like just floating through it. Everything, like, it wasn't easy necessarily. I had periods of time with, like, that were kind of destabilizing, and where I was experiencing a lot of emotional baggage flow up at the same time, to the point, like, I had this kind of I had 1 month where I was experiencing kind of these panic attacks, which it wasn't completely out of control or anything, but I was, for example, walking in a grocery store and suddenly everything just changed. So it's anxiety that colored everything, and I started sweating. I was cold, but I was sweating, and smells were distorted. So I remember had to go by the meat counter, and it just smelled of death. Just the worst smell, like death. And I, like, yeah, so those were examples of the very physical reactions. Like, anger could have the same effect, like this minuscule thing could set me off and get me so angry that I would start sweating, would get diarrhea and kind of dry heave at the same time, like this very. But it was all good because I had that readiness to face it. I wasn't looking for external solutions to these problems, because I recognized that there was a direct correlation between my practice, my energetic states, and these physical symptoms here that I was experiencing, and mental symptoms in the form of anxiety and kind of like paranoia or panicky states that I was experiencing. And because I didn't look for any external solution, I just faced it head on, like, just with the support of my guru Baba, of course. We were in constant we had constant communication, and I would ask, just to I would ask for advice, and or ask whether, is this normal? Have anybody else experienced it? And he would confirm that it's normal, and give a few pointers to how to deal with it, and I would do it. And because I was practicing in this way, I very quickly was able to deal with the stuff, and it would release itself. And as a result of that authentic practice, Bhumis opened, the practice progressed very quickly. But when I hit the perfection state, it seems like some of that readiness dried out, like or that I didn't keep up with, like, somehow the readiness became stagnant or something. And maybe I should mention what, like, maybe I should go into, maybe I should talk a little bit about what I mean by readiness. I've mentioned a little bit, but there is this term in Buddhism called merit. And we often translate this merit. It's kind of like a weird word, at least for me as not a non-English speaker. It kind of doesn't, what does it mean? It has kind of different meaning in Norwegian, where it has to do with somebody's accomplishments. But anyways, so it's this readiness or spiritual maturity. But it is that merit that I'm talking about. And of course, this spiritual maturity, it comes through one's own like maturation through suffering. That's one. And also through practice, through practicing for the benefit of all beings. Bodhicitta is a very inherent, like very crucial aspect of spiritual maturity, to the point where we see you see it all the time, that as practice progresses, as you mentioned, bodhicitta starts kind of naturally revealing itself, which is why it is also, included from the beginning, because this speeds up the process and it speeds up the spiritual maturation. But this kind of stagnated as I started perfecting Bhumis. And it's kind of like strange, because the first perfection I experienced, I could clearly see how Buddhahood meant being perfectly released from any mental emotional patterns. So I could, because I had a cessation, because my mind temporarily dropped off long enough for me to study how it actually, what it actually is, to put it like that. I could see that, oh yeah, okay, I see how it works. This emptiness really goes deep, like all the way, and it just cuts through. There is no habit in this emptiness, in this empty nature of mind.
So it was a big insight for you.
Yeah, it was. So it's not completely new or anything. It just became clearer. But regardless, for whatever reason, things started slowing down in my practice, and I think it's kind of natural. It happens. It happens sometimes, not necessarily for an obvious reason. It might be, I'm just saying that not every time things slow down means that you're doing something wrong. Maybe it just takes more time. But in my case, I think it was something else. That one of the things that happens when you start perfecting the Bhumis is that, because you're kind of going back to the beginning, you have to perfect the first Bhumi, then second Bhumi, and you've already been through all of those layers. And so there was this feeling of like, I've been here before, I'm doing the same thing, like, has this no end? And I would also notice that while the practice had a significant effect on certain aspects of my suffering, it didn't address, there were other aspects that weren't as clearly dealt with. And so this made me wonder, is there like, is this a complete practice? Maybe there's something else I should be including. So these kind of doubts started creeping in to the point where I was over those, like, that these, because it took a few years then to perfect the Bhumis. And throughout those years, for periods, I was increasingly looking for external solutions again. Like, I was looking to psychology, I was looking to, medicine, I was looking to different kind of practices, cold showers, walking barefoot for a period of time, diet, all of these kind of solutions to the health problems that I was experiencing, not only on a physical level, but also on a mental level, in the form of like mood disturbances, like mood swings throughout the day, energy swings throughout the day, just general tiredness, sluggishness, all of these things. And I was looking for external solutions. So I was at one point, shopping for various mental health diagnoses. And some of it was fruitful, especially, the physical. For example, at one point I figured out that I have sleep apnea, and I was able to address that by starting to. Sleep apnea is where you stop breathing at night, which is obviously a problem. You basically choke for like up to a minute at a time before you kind of go into survival mode, and the nervous system actively gasps for breath. But this can happen, I think when they measured me, it was like 117 times throughout the whole night.
That sounds like a lot.
Yeah. And I wasn't aware of it. I just knew that my sleep was shit, and that I was also a bit hesitant of going to sleep because I had this anxiety around sleep. But then I was able to address that, started using a mask that kind of like adds like a pressured, it pressurizes the airways with air so that they stay open. And there was positive results. It didn't solve any existential problems, but there were positive health results. So it wasn't like all of this external looking for solutions. All of it wasn't, how do you say, like without fruit or pointless. But I think it was more the mode that I was actually, at one point I was thinking that like it kind of became more important periodically to find out like the medical condition rather than addressing the existential basis for making it a problem. And it wasn't clear at the time for me that this was going on, but looking at it now, it seems that, yeah, definitely at certain points in time, I was looking more outside for solutions. And that's kind of like the basics of spiritual practice, is that you recognize the suffering to originate, or the causes of your suffering to be internal, or at least the solutions, or however you want to formulate it, instead of, ascribing external causes to it. And that was one way then that my kind of lack of merit, lack of readiness at this stage in practice showed itself, and it significantly slowed me down. One of the things, I think what saved me in this period was the fact that I had my guru to communicate with. And not just communicate, but that he actually cared to the degree that he would, how do you say, like, because one of the issues I was having was that when things got darker, I would kind of stay to myself, kind of self-isolate. When I was experiencing, more trouble, and I think it's quite normal, you get kind of emotionally disconnected, or it's harder to open up to other people when you're feeling under distress, when your nervous system kind of goes into crisis mode or fight-flight response. And so I would self-isolate, but fortunately my guru, Baba, cared enough to actually kind of actively help out and kind of carry me through certain of these, make sure that I was kind of staying with the practices that he knew would help, and kind of making that extra effort out of love. So that was that was fortunate, because I'm not sure if I could have pulled through myself alone. But Yeah, I think that's kind of the main pillar. Yeah, sorry.
You'd build up a good relationship with him. I think that's by this point you were great friends. Apart from this teacher-student relationship, you connected at a friendship level as well.
Yeah, actually quite like from the beginning. So we stayed in touch, from after awakening, we stayed in regular touch. But after he came to visit, so he came over to my hometown, Tromsø in northern Norway, to teach Rainbow Body Yoga. And so we met for the first time, and we also spent time together. We went to this cabin, amongst other things, and just hung out, just the two of us. And we quickly we quickly noticed that we're vibing well. Like we have the same humor, we have similarities in our personalities and in our worldviews, that makes it easy for us to have a conversation. So yeah, right from the beginning, that became evident that there's something more. It's like it's more than just student-teacher relationship, but also a friendship. And I think that is the reason why I think, as I said, he more kind of took an active role in helping me, out of genuine care and love, as like for a friend.
And this is specifically useful for you in particular, as you said before, because perhaps this first year of fast progress, you're with your personality type, you're sort of riding the wave of enthusiasm. Before, you'd found it very difficult to stick to something, but now this period, because you were seeing such great progress within yourself, it's like that wave of enthusiasm was carrying you through. And then I've heard you describe before, the perfection phase was where things, the real work started to begin. So this is where your merit is running out, to phrase it like that. And so this is where your relationship with Bubba was particularly useful, with your personality type of finding it difficult to stick to a structured system. Now you've got this support of a friend and teacher who's helping you.
Yeah. Self-discipline has always been an issue for me, or that is relying on myself to carry through with like routine, like a basic routine, always been kind of problematic. But I should also mention that, at this point, so already in the autumn after, in 2016, I moved to Finland to live with Baba, to live closer with him. Like I lived in the same building as him. And I stayed with him from, I think, October 2016 to, was it October or anyways, September, October 2017. So about 11 months. And this was also the period where I experienced this slowing down. So at the end of 2016, beginning of 2017 was where things started slowing down. But I was still hanging out, daily with him and really establishing a deep relationship with him. And like what I have noticed also since then is that because when I'm with him, I naturally kind of absorb his discipline, because he's a very, he has, like, there is no doubt that practice is the center of his life. It's not something that he just says and then, I've been guilty of, I still feel that it's like the center of my life, but I have been guilty of saying that while at the same time not practicing as much as I should. You get what I mean. I haven't
Mm-hmm.
abandoned practice, but I haven't really lived up to what I would say the minimum requirements for some periods of time. But he's very kind of disciplined in that way. Um, uh, it doesn't seem actually to be a discipline thing either. It's just that's the way it is. Practice comes first. But anyways, my point was that I kind of absorbed that for every time, like when I was living in Finland, I absorbed it, and I absorbed so much from just hanging out, not just in a teacher-student setting of like, or in a teaching setting, like receiving teachings, but also, outside of that, just grocery shopping, going to cafes, hanging out with his family, all of these things. And I kind of also had like a look into the spontaneity, or how he he hasn't in any way separated out practice from everyday life.
Mm.
So if we're sitting in a cafe and there's like a spontaneous guru yoga session, that's where you practice guru yoga. It's not like, necessarily chanting to all the other tables, but just absorbing the blessing. And so I learned a lot of how lived Dharma actually looks like. So it's not this grandiose, this fantastical, it's a normal life situation, but it's just mixed in with this practicing whenever the opportunity spontaneously appears to practice. But anyways, yeah, so that kind of grounded me a lot in the beginning. But eventually I did have to move back to Norway for financial reasons. And it was always during those periods where I was back in my old hometown, where, I had my network of, everything from drug contacts to drinking buddies, all of that didn't go away. And neither did my latent addictive patterns. And so I struggled, for longer periods where it became a merit issue. And in that confusion, what the thing with merit is that it clouds the way that you think. That's the problem. You don't see reality as it, you don't see the opportunities like as they present themselves. You don't view your teacher correctly. You don't view your own role. Like everything kind of gets skewed. And it's not like you're consciously being insincere, or you just confuse the situation, confuse everything. And in my confusion, I started like increasingly looking for other solutions, such as, as I mentioned, trying to figure out, what kind of diagnosis is the basis of these symptoms that I'm having, and so on. This lack of concentration, these mood issues, lack of energy, whatever. But in doing so, it kind of significantly slowed down the practice. But it continued. So I had the benefit of a solid relationship with my guru foundation. I had my own, like I was still practicing. It wasn't like I was cut out practicing, then I would be finished. But I kept to the practice, even if for periods it wasn't the most high quality practice. I also built up a structure around going to all the retreats, very important, so that because I had to then, it made me touch in with Baba regularly, and also those, like the act of practice, when you practice intensely for a period of time, you get to breathe again. So like that's the feeling. You clarify the mind, and you get to recalibrate your priorities and kind of see things in a straight manner, see things clearly again, before then going down into the depths of everyday life again. So anyways, I put in these, like I had these structures that kind of kept me going. And even though it was a slow process, the Bhumi perfections, they kept happening. So during the first few years, like the first six Bhumis perfected. I remember I was living in the UK at the time where the sixth Bhumi perfected, and it stood out because what happens is that the qualities of the nature of mind become very much more available in the physical body. You have cleared out the selfing mechanism in the body, which just opens this space and the qualities of this basic space of the nature of mind much more than before. And then in the period that I lived in the UK I perfected seventh and eighth, and I lived in the UK for maybe 2 years, if I remember correctly. And when I came back, I had to move back to Norway after when Corona hit. I decided that it might be wise to go back, hang out with like my girlfriend, and to be stuck here and not stuck somewhere else. And so those last two Bhumi perfection took about a year each. So then going from 1 month for like the first Bhumi perfection took 1 month, the last one took 1 year, just to give a sense of, and there was like this increasingly long periods time in between there.
You'd obviously had a son at some point in your last perfections. Perhaps you want to describe how that helped or hindered.
Yeah. Well, so my son was born in January 2021. That was right after the ninth perfection. So it was like I had one to go, one perfection to go. But by the way, like how it was experienced this, because I'm kind of like I realized that I'm talking about like the external structure of things, but how it was experienced was just that subtle hindrance that, like especially now, I'm especially talking after the sixth perfection, this subtle layer that's kind of like almost invisible, but still it becomes more apparent when it's not there. Like when you have glimpses of it not being there, you realize that, oh, okay, so there's still something here.
These cessations that you were talking about.
Yeah. But my point is that it's really subtle what's going on here. And I think that's also part of why it takes a longer time to deal with. Not for everybody, so there's something else as well. But anyways, it's very subtle. When
you're dealing with the substrate consciousness, there aren't objects that you're looking at anymore. It's this foggy cloud or field, as it were.
Yeah. There are two ways to make it clearer, like this territory, and one is through like cessations. Naturally, by means of like how do you say, by negation, you realize what was there. And the other way is just how the tantric method works, is that especially with wrathful deities, but also with some others, they kind of target this area very well, illuminating it, so highlighting the remaining part. And this is, I'm mentioning this because I'm not sure how I would have gotten through that period without Tantra, because it's so subtle. You might like, if it wasn't for other issues I was having, I might have just gotten stuck in thinking that, oh, I've already, completed it, because most of the time the obscuration was so thin, so transparent in a way, at least that it could have fooled me. But Tantra really highlights. And one story I have of that is that we had, while I was living in the UK, we had a visitor, a Sangha member, come to visit. I was living in a center. We had a center in the UK. And we had a visitor there, a Sangha member came to visit me and James, who I was living with in the center. just staying and practicing, hanging out in the center for a few weeks. And during this time, he mentioned something about how far he thought he had come in his practice. And he said that he thought that he had perfected quite a few Bhumis, that it was that he was much further than what I believed that he was at the time, and what it also turned out much further than Baba believed that he was. So as Baba and I was talking about this, he said that, okay, let's test it. Let's see if we can make him see what remains, or whether more remains than what is visible to him currently. And so what he said was that have him practice wrathful deities. So wrathful deities are these deities that you can see depictions of them. They're kind of looking like demons, really like dynamic, fierce energies, and they relate to these more like dynamic energies, dynamic qualities of the nature of mind. It's not all just smiles and there's also firmness and power. Power, you could say, is really like power. But we started practicing every single session wrathful deities until the point where, because I didn't mention, of course, anything to him about it. I just, every time we sat down, I suggested that we should practice some wrathful deity, to the point where he just, I mentioned one, like the last time I said, okay, let's practice this and this wrathful deity again. I feel like practicing wrathful deities. And he was like, oh, no, I'm sorry. I just can't take it anymore, And he did realize, without anybody telling him, that he wasn't as far along the path that he thought that he was, that there was more stuff left. And this was highlighted because of the tantric practices, and specifically the wrathful deities. So this is one benefit of Tantra that you just don't find in any other. Yeah, you just don't find it in sutra practices. So it's much more difficult to work with these subtle forms of self.
And it's the perfect way to keep you humble.
Exactly. Yeah.
I know this was a very confusing thing on my path, particularly in the early days. Is, well, I don't particularly feel awakened in any way, and I'm looking at these people who supposedly have had. I'm talking about the famous people who are teaching and these types of things, and they look so blissful, and they might even say, I've reached enlightened mind and these types of things. And I'm not experiencing this, but gradually as you go on, you realize that, well, if you want to see things, you've got to ruffle up the water. You've got to ruffle up the mud from the bottom. If you just allow the mud to settle and your life is good and you live a relatively comfortable life and it all floats to the bottom and the water seems clear, you're not gonna be able to work your way through. The two modes include the openness of the natural state, but that to be able to witness the selfing structure and to shake it up, to muddy the waters so that you can see through and deconstruct all of that. So it keeps you very humble all the way. If your practice is effective, and particularly using wrathful deities right to the end, it keeps you humble. You cannot believe that you have reached the end because it's obvious that selfing still occurs.
Yeah, very important point, that if you don't have wrathful deities or these very dynamic, powerful practices, what you have to rely on is external stressors, and they're not very reliable. And you can't bring them up regularly, so that, for example, you might have this. Well, how often are one in a really really high stress situation that kind of shatters one's own self-image of being a very calm person. It's not necessarily that often. It varies from person to person. But anyways, my point is that it's not very reliable. And so what seems to be happening with a lot of practitioners and also teachers is that they kind of grow comfortable at one point. Their practice stagnates, and they also believe then that they are further along the path because of these external signs of peace and happiness. And I'm not sure, like I've thought about it many times, like how do these people that seem very, it almost seems like a spiritual persona sometimes on stage or when they're like speaking, how do they actually look in everyday life? Like, are they this way all the time? And if so, like, what's going on? So I think that I'm not saying that everybody is not like is being disingenuous. Is that
Disingenuine?
disingenuine? But I'm just saying that it's easy to fall into the belief that you're further along as you are than you are, and I've done it many times. Like very guilty of it. It's just that with the safety mechanism of Tantra, you just can't stay there. You can't stay in spiritually bypassing your own stuff because what happens if you spiritual bypass while on Tantra is just that when it suddenly bursts, it bursts with such a power that is just no way of hiding from your own shit. So yeah, keeps you humble and keeps you active on the path. It's this, yeah, you really can't rest. You really can't rest until there isn't anything left. And that's my experience is that when a certain aspect of the mind has been fully purified, you can practice, like say a practice that earlier would have triggered you. You can practice this until you're blue in the face and it won't have any effect. There won't be any contraction on the level of the mind. But speaking of this, so you asked about my son, having a son, and how that related to my practice. And that was a good example of such an external stressor. That's the roughest period I've ever experienced in my life is that, and I'm sure that I'm sure there wasn't anything exceptional about like my own situation in relate. I think it's pretty rough on everybody. That being said, it was like I was my nervous system went into a kind of crisis mode where because I wasn't sleeping properly, very normal thing with children. But I had that sleep apnea untreated going on at the same time. It wasn't until a few months into having become a father that I started treatment for that. Like everything that all of the structures I had put in place in order to keep my head floating kind of just went away. Like nothing left. Couldn't travel. This was Corona time, so couldn't travel. And anyways, if I could have traveled, just like I would have. Well, I couldn't travel. I was stuck with this, my son and my family. I wasn't able to partake in retreats, to participate in retreats like I had been relying on previously. I wasn't able for a long period to host any regular meetings or to do any teaching activities. I wasn't able to sit because there wasn't any, like, there just wasn't any structure to my daily life. Like, okay, so we wake up when the baby wakes up, and then we have some time to sleep whenever he sleeps. And so everything was just dictated, no time or energy for practice in that sense. So what I had to do was that I had to kind of like re-examine the whole thing. And first of all, I had to have like a minimum of regular daily sitting. So what we did was that we gave Monica, my partner, and we gave each other like half an hour, 1 hour each, so in the morning. So to have that foundational practice covered, daily sitting. But then on top of that, I had to really kind of make, as I was saying, like make the tantric practice, kind of pick up again what I had learned through living with Baba, that you can practice at any, like you don't have to sit, you can be driving, just practice, just say the mantras. I was whenever I would have Ailo, my son, go to sleep, he had to be carried the whole time, like he just wouldn't sleep if you put him down. So I was walking around, sometimes for hours, just chanting mantras, and just try to make the practice a part of every single activity. So, I didn't perfectly do this, but that was the whole thing that had to happen to a greater degree in order to continue the progress of my path. And it did continue. It did continue slowly, but it did continue. And eventually I was able to participate in retreats. I was able to pick up the weekly meetings. We were able to travel, to meet Sangha in person. And so, or speaking for myself, I got through it somehow, although it was pretty rough. And I got through it while at the same time, processing whatever was left with the last Bhumi perfection that I was working on. And so towards the end of 2021, October, I had a cessation that lasted for about 4.5 days, approximately. It's a bit difficult to tell because it was gradually kind of creeping back in, the stuff. So let's say 4 days then. And that was the longest cessation that I had had, to the point where I thought that, okay, now I've done it. Now I'm done. Now this is emptiness realization. But then after 4 days or 4.5 days became aware that, okay, so there's clearly something left here. So the structure isn't entirely gone. Continued my practice, and in February 2022, Baba sent me a message. So I had kind of like at this point I was just fed up with sitting. Like anything with practice just felt like it's just going on forever. There's no end to this emptiness practice. But Baba sent me a message saying that, okay, practice a specific practice. It's called shattering the substrate mind, kind of like an advanced wrathful practice. And he said, practice shattering the substrate mind every day for the next couple of days, for a few days. I immediately picked up on the importance of it, because Baba it doesn't say things like that unless there's some very specific reason that he has picked up, that one should practice it. And so I did practice it, and I think it was a few days later that I woke up in the middle of the night on the 11th of February 2022, and something had dropped off again. It was just clear, whether eyes were closed or open. It was just clear, soft, something lacking, no structure to the experience. And yeah, it didn't come back after that. Whatever dropped off didn't come back after that.
So you talk of this clarity that had opened up to you. Is there any way to try and describe how this is? So you spent a year perfecting 10th, so you must sort of be aware of that final subtlety quite well. 10th is really subtle, right? And almost it takes so long because you're confused at what's left. Is there a sense that you're just somehow aware that there is something left, but to target it is pretty difficult by this point? And what's that? Is there any way to describe what that difference from still being stuck in it to it falling away, dropping off as you describe it?
Well, well, it is difficult to target, but as I said, with the tantric practices, it still kind of keeps you on your toes in that it's still kind of like it becomes more visible. And it became very visible, as I said, like I already said that when cessations happen, it's very visible that something was there. That's how it felt, and it's very similar to it's kind of the same when something drops off, it's the same. So when some part of the mind drops off, so for example, going back to awakening, when that drops off, it's the same as when perfecting the 10th, only it's complete then. Only that there is nothing more to drop off. And how you know it is just that it is completely empty. Like you can't get anything more empty when nothing is solid. Like when you can't find any of those previous reference points in your mind. So what I'm talking about, like I've already mentioned that this term self, it relates to these contractions, but they're existential or contractions, like on an existential level, meaning that things appear existing as tensions or as solid, like somethings.
Yeah.
So each individual thought is a something. It's kind of like a small entity there, and each like oneself is experienced as an entity, and then all of these subtle layers are genuinely sticky. Like they actually draw you down, or they kind of push you. In the case of like positive, like euphoric, they're sticky too. You when you drink alcohol, for example, you say things that as you're saying them you shouldn't be saying, but you're still kind of just carried along by this stickiness. But all of that just went away. Like going to sleep at around 11, and 3 hours later at 2 o'clock I wake up, and it's just nothing, no solid structure to any of these things whatsoever. Like there's just no solidity to any on the level of the mind. So I'm going to go back to the body later, but I'm talking about the level of the mind, and there's a subtle difference. But
so there was no doubt throughout your 10th perfection. I never noticed you sort of fall into the idea that you were close, as it were, or it was always obviously there all the way through, apart from this sort of 4-day cessation that you talk about. It was always very obviously there. And I think for me, one of the inspiring things about your path, because there's quite a few things that I relate to your journey, and some of the suffering that you went through was very sort of visceral, and you had health problems and these different waves of this emotional life that you were going through was very real and apparent to you. And now you arrive at this clarity where all the solidity, the weight of these emotions and tension have just dropped off. So the point I was making was that you through the whole of the 10th, whilst it was very subtle, there was never any doubt that you were still in samsara. And then when this moment happened for you at night, as you woke up, you were like, no, I'm not. It's just dropped. And I'm guessing the idea of samsara and nirvana also drop.
like just like with the cessation, there was no way I couldn't be sure that it wasn't a temporary cessation. A cessation feels the same, like regardless of where you're in the path, whether you're pre-awakening, post-awakening, or wherever you are, advanced practitioners, not. If the cessation is complete, it's the same. It's the Buddhanature revealing itself completely. Because we are always already that nature. It is our true nature, regardless of what level of confusion makes us not see this. And it can drop off. so I didn't necessarily know that this was it straight away. I knew that it was a cessation. I knew that, it's fully and completely empty for now, but I still treated it as just another sensation at first, cessation at first. We had like at the 2 week mark, it became kind of like unlikely that it would that any structure would come back. Then I had experienced all kinds of different situations, being in a bad mood, being in a happy mood, being like, then I had experienced a range of emotions, a range of experiences, and nothing changed in terms of the realization of emptiness. And it's an important point because I'm saying I experienced negative emotions and I experienced good emotions, because none of the content of my mind or behavior, my personality, changed when that cessation happened. So there was, of course, an initial period where I was kind of like happy that, finally this like this kind of fresh novelty, the novelty of it, to put it like that. It's not like a wow, but it's still like a novelty, and yeah, a kind of celebration period.
Also, you're opening, you've perfected the 10th, which means there's still the 11th, 12th, and 13th to go. So I wonder if you want to talk about your experiences in the early days of was it a kind of relief for you? And how did you experience these arising of the luminous quality of Buddhanature?
So how I experienced it was just this gradual blossoming of these qualities related to it. And uh, one, like 11th Bhumi, for example, is associated with purity of experience. And I think that I made a significant, at least kind of opening or maturation of this quality about a month after the initial perfection. But after that, I just felt, as you say, like not the back of my head, but I felt something like further, like some warmth behind the eyes, spreading to the whole body, that kind of like opened up, warmth, glow, a feeling of glow, luminosity, as you used. So, well, it wasn't only the 11th Bhumi that kind of opened wider, but also it must have been like 12th Bhumi, because it was primarily in the physical body, if I remember correctly. But over those next few months, it was just kind of like an increasing revealing of these subtle, I should say, very, like they're subtle, it's subtle warmth. But my experience overall, the whole field of experience became gradually warmer, softer, purer also. It became easier to, well, it became more grounded, the whole thing. Like, as I said in the beginning, I kind of had to keep looking, or I had to, it's partly because you're so used to looking for emptiness. So it's kind of like an automatic response. Even once, it's everything is gone, you're still kind of like looking, did something come back or whatever. So it's partly that, but it's also that it's it's less embodied somehow. Like emptiness alone is not very concrete. It's those positive flavors that make it more concrete and more embodied. And so when these qualities matured, became clearer, more revealed, so did my general experience of the whole thing become more grounded, more positive.
So how does this relate in day-to-day life as you're going about regular life? And in a way, you're saying that your outward expressions of your behaviors and things, and in a sense, these emotions that are going through you, there's not much changed, but yet your perspective has changed. And I would think that your ability to cope with day-to-day situations and stresses, that there's something that has how you relate to them has changed.
Yeah. So one problem with the structure of the selfing mechanism is that it makes all of the stuff that comes up linger around for a long time. This whole structure. So for example,
Oh yeah, yeah.
somebody says something insulting in the morning, and then in the afternoon you're still kind of churning on the same, or like
Uh-huh.
I'm sure people can relate. That seems to go away.
Mm.
So you experience these things, but they're just bursts. Say it's some volatile, say it's anger. It's just like a flame that bursts up, but it's as quickly extinguished or just burns out. It's not extinguished, actually. That's a wrong. But it just burns out very quickly because
Mm.
there's nothing that holds it in place like before. The structure isn't there that holds it in place. That does have like a real impact on everyday life. You're not, walking around, or I am not at least walking around with a grudge. I might also, like, there's more flexibility in catching yourself as, for example, if you start bickering with you, like say I start bickering with my partner, and I might just like in the middle of it just think like, fuck, this is this is just a habit. And be able to cut through it. Not always, but at least there's more flexibility there. Yeah, so that's a big difference, and it does affect relationships, the openness towards other beings quite significantly.
There's something interesting I've heard you say is how there's not really any transition states anymore. Do you want to elaborate on that a little?
I sure I don't experience time the same way. It's much more of an organic experience of time. Everybody experiences when they're engaged, it goes faster. So that seems to be happening much more, that just time just disappears. But also that in general, it's just very hard to judge, how long a certain period of time has been, because the normal measures of that is gone. Like nobody, there's not nobody's kind of keeping track about how much time has passed. So it's not that you become completely time blind, but there's a difference there in how it's perceived.
How is your experience of meditation? We're going on to talk that you're still continuing a practice. So you sit down and clarity is all there. There's no transition point into that even. Whereas someone like me, I have to still spend a little while trying to allow myself into that meditative state. But what's practice like for you now?
Well, it is as you say, like there is no emptiness is a given at any, like that's just, there's no need to look for anything there. Mind is always revealed. In the recent episode that Baba and I recorded, he used the term wisdom as basis. So it's just the basis for everything, including one's practice. So like when you are standing up and getting ready to sit down, it's empty. When you're sitting down, it's empty. And when you're seated, it's still empty. So that it just doesn't change. There's no transition. The mind is always revealed as the basis, like the nature of the mind is always revealed as the basis of the experience. Yeah, so there just wasn't anything solid about the experience anymore, and it felt very different in that sense. And I think that one, like that last bit that went of the confusion in terms of like the existential selfing mechanism, that last kind of identification that had to go was that which made emptiness into a thing. So we've already talked about making me into a thing, making my thoughts and emotions into a thing, that whole network, and making these subtle states into a thing. But all of that selfing, however subtle it is, like even if there's the tiniest layer of subtle fogginess outside, like in the edge of the aura left, it still creates a distance to the natural state, to emptiness. There's still a separation between my experience now and this future goal, or this goal of spiritual practice, emptiness. Like when that last bit of the selfing mechanism disappeared, there wasn't anything that separated emptiness from this very ordinary experience. Like everything, there isn't anything that, there isn't a thing called emptiness. It doesn't exist. It's not in any way separate from anything else that we experience when it's realized. When it's realized, it is exposed as the very nature of everything that exists. So yeah, I don't like it. It can't be more intimate, because it's like the true identity. Like it's part of one's own being is empty. I was even able to more deeply feel negative emotions because it was directly felt. There was no holding back. And so to the outside world, I might for a period of time even have like become slightly worse in my personality and grumpiness, because I wasn't filtering my own behavior the same way. I wasn't suppressing like anything subconsciously anymore. But of course, there still was that negativity, and that suggested that on one level, I'm not done in my practice. So just to clarify, the emptiness was complete. That was done. Like that was no doubt about it. After, the first month and a half, there was no doubt in my mind that whatever I experience, it's empty and doesn't have a structure.
And now it's been over a year and a couple of months.
Yeah, 1 year and 2 months. Yeah, 2 months. Yeah, and it's still the same. It just hasn't changed. Yeah, so every time in the beginning, as I said, as I experienced these negative things, I would check, okay, so is there a structure now? but there just wasn't. The body didn't have like a structure, and the feelings, emotions didn't have a structure. Or I should say, rather than body, that feelings and emotions didn't have a structure, and thoughts and these, like there wasn't a feeling of having an aura. So some who are listening to this might not be able to relate to the feeling of having an aura, but for those who are tantric practitioners, they should know, at least on some level, have access to the changing energies of the aura. That also, like the aura is just gone. That structure is gone. Like you can still experience blessings in the aura, but that reality, solidity of it is just gone. Yeah, so that's like that's what I call like the emptiness of emptiness itself. Like the two, if we take the two parts of the two-part formula, selfless mode and self-based mode, it's the final complete collapse between the two. And so the thought of practicing emptiness at this point, it just doesn't make any sense. Like, what could I possibly practice when emptiness doesn't exist as a separate thing from this very ordinary experience that I'm having, that is always empty? But that being said, as I mentioned, there were other things that became evident with time, such as like these lingering patterns of negative thinking, these lingering patterns of the physical body to react to certain triggers. For example, certain stressing situations would have physical symptoms being triggered, like stress, nervousness, like very, very normal things. And that was a bit hard to wrap my head around in the beginning, that, okay, so I thought I was going to be done with this, but that just turned out to not be the case. That once emptiness is completely realized, that's the only difference. All the patterns are still operating, they're just empty.
empty of any inherent existence that we relate to the self.
Yeah, empty of any solidity, empty of any selfhood, self-entityness. You can't separate it out from, say awareness, and then there is this negative emotion. But that whole thing collapses, and so there just is that experience of that negative emotion. It's still negative, and it's not comfortable. It's still not comfortable. And it's still a problem in that parts of one's thinking and emotional reactions and like reactions to certain situations are still habitual. They're still kind of predetermined. So they're still programmed in that way. You're not completely free. It's just the structure of it that has fallen off. And this was very confusing in the beginning. But as I said, every time I checked, emptiness was still there. And I was able to see, well, I was kind of able to understand it, although it took a long time, that there is more than like emptiness is one thing, and then there is something else. And that something else is what constitutes the practice after 10th perfection, because it's not the end. And the classical manuals also state that there is more to Buddhahood or more to perfection than emptiness aspect of it.
So what you've described here is the end of emptiness practice, and we might call that first stage of Buddhahood. I imagine this sort of going into yourself where, there's this sense of negativity. You go to the idea of emptiness, but I imagine it was pretty instant, like, well, there's nothing to look at whatsoever.
The whole first year was kind of like I was in a limbo where I was gradually seeing the depths of what was left. What was left to deal with. It kind of became more and more revealed, this whole new dimension to suffering, you could say, and I can't find another word for it. It's kind of like the reason I'm mentioning it, that I can't find another word. It might seem like contradictory to talk about, on the one hand, first stage Buddhahood, on the other, suffering.
Yeah.
We somehow go.
That is one of the definitions of first stage Buddhahood, is you're free from dukkha, the existential self.
Yeah.
So then someone like me comes along and asks you what you're talking about. It's a bit confusing.
Yeah. So, but it's different because and it's clearly perceived different. So when 10th perfection does happen, there is one aspect of suffering that is completely gone, and it is the existential structure of it. That's what's gone. But there is a different, more gross version of suffering that remains. And I guess I should say that it remained for me, because I'm not sure if everybody carries the same amount of trauma in their system, emotional baggage, emotional wounds. But what became then clearer and clearer is that the body still remembers. The body still remembers the pain that you have gone through, and it appears as physical tension, as like I mentioned already, like nervousness, these kind of very gross reaction patterns. And this, I think the clarity of it culminated last summer when I was attending a wedding. And on the one hand, my mind was completely free, no doubt about it. On the other hand, it felt like I was wearing a straitjacket. Like I was just completely tight and socially awkward, lots of social anxiety. I wanted to dance, and I was looking at people dancing and was thinking like how wonderful it must be to just be able to go out there and just be free and dance. So, but physically I was just incapable because I was so tight. All the while it being perfectly clear to me that it's not on a mental, it's not the mind, that it's somehow in the physical body, or somehow on a more gross level. And it is a bit difficult to point out the difference, because the difference wasn't clear to me until the one layer fell off. So when the selfing stopped, this other form of suffering became clear. But the two had been modeled together before. I thought that they were one. I thought it was one and the same. But still, I think that image of like a straight jacket in the middle of an open space is a good one, because you have then both. You have there's no doubt about the emptiness of mind, the emptiness of any phenomena experienced, but the body still has this kind of weight to it, and still has these negative emotions. Those emotions are empty, but it's still kind of like uncomfortable, and it has this physicality to it. I was getting kind of frustrated with it, because I just couldn't find out how to deal with it in practice. How I received some practices. On one level they worked, but on another level it just felt like it didn't really address it. But then a few months ago, in the retreat in Wales that you also attended, the spring retreat, it finally clicked. Like the conceptual understanding based on practical experience that was offered through that retreat finally kind of made me understand conceptually what was going on. Primarily, it was because of the introduction of the understanding that there are two energy bodies. So we have already covered in this episode quite thoroughly the subtle body, the subtle energy body of energy centers, energy channels that stores the selfing mechanism, where all the selfing is stored. But then what was introduced here, experientially and in theory, was a grosser form of an energy body, which in Chinese philosophy, medicine, is often referred to as the meridian system. And as an antidote to heal, whereas insight practice deals with the selfing, that's what we're doing with the two-part formula, is insight, bringing clarity, bringing direct experience, experiential insight into these various components. That doesn't seem to do the trick with trauma. You can watch them as much as you want, but they still keep acting the very same way, because there's some energy that you're not getting to with insight. It's just not releasing. But what was offered, in addition to the view of that, the view now included an explanation for what was going on, there was also the practice of, well, specifically on this retreat, what was introduced was Divine Mother practice. So here behind me is Divine Mother in the form of Amrita Sundari. And the practice of Amrita Sundari, what it did for me on that retreat was that it allowed me to cultivate a positive energy in the physical body, to the point where these tight physical knots, as they are experienced, were able to finally open up. In a sea creatures, you have these shells that they slowly open up, but as soon as you kind of something happens, they withdraw. And it was the same with these things. They were just completely stubborn, wouldn't open up, no matter how much you kind of sit and look at it. It just doesn't work, doesn't open up. But this countered that tightness with positivity, with love, with feelings, cultivating states of safety that are viscerally felt. Like, I'm not talking about some abstract form of safety, thinking that you're safe. I'm talking about the physical body knowing full well that it's safe, because that's the whole energetic vibe signals safety, comfort, Divine Mother hugging you as a metaphor, the whole universe kind of like holding you tightly and gently in its hands. And what happened, very quickly I saw that, okay, so I can sit here, it's very comfortable, and I saw that, oh, these things start bubbling up, like memories of my past, my childhood, different relationships, abusive relationships I've been in. All of these kind of memories just started popping up, bubbling up without any, like I could experience the negativity of it, like what had been trapped as a time capsule in my physical like body, or more correctly in the energy system of the meridians. I could experience the emotion of it, but it wasn't, but I had a stability to just experience it without, I mentioned like abusive relationship. I was in a relationship where I was kind of being emotionally manipulated at age 13, 14, which I hadn't really thought about at all until suddenly it started flowing up. I was seeing this relationship and I was seeing this person mistreating me emotionally, but there wasn't any bad feelings towards this person. It wasn't personal. I saw that, oh, it's just a fucking trauma that is going as a contagious virus from one person. It's just spreading without anybody wanting to hurt each other. At least most people, it's just trauma doing its thing, which is causing pain and hurt. But I was experiencing it from this moment, and not experiencing it as being identified with it, which kind of draws you back into the time where it appeared. So, for example, I wasn't then seeing it and becoming a scared 14-year-old. I was seeing it now in a different context, and it just kind of kept releasing.
I guess it's a really free expression of it as it comes through you, because Shane, for example, described the selfing as a suppression mechanism. And so what you're describing here is that there is no suppression whatsoever anymore. You literally can't turn away from these emotions, and you're actively bringing up this trauma, which is somehow trapped in this meridian system. It bubbles up as you describe it, and perhaps you're feeling the sensations of it as well as the memories and things coming up, and so there's no turning away from it. And maybe before, if you were to do that, you would have automatically, or you wouldn't have been able to help but push it away. The pain perhaps would have been too much, so you can't see through it, or nowhere near as effectively as you can now that you have this one that's dropped off. You're experiencing emptiness. So now this is a perfect time to begin this practice.
That's how it feels. Yeah, perfect time. I'm not sure how it would work prior. Like, I don't have any experience of working with these parallel paths of on the one hand, the selfing mechanism, on the other, the trauma stored in the meridian system. I don't have any experience of working with it at the same time. Deliberately. Of course, it's not like I haven't, I have never experienced the activation of the meridian system, or opening of or purification of trauma. Like, it has happened, but now I'm specifically targeting it. So I don't think that it's a prerequisite to first go through the whole deconstruction of the selfing mechanism, but it certainly helps, because, as you say, there is this suppression that can happen. Like, the whole selfing mechanism is an added structure that holds things in place. But my experience now is, as you say, I'm not actually directly bringing up or actively bringing up trauma. That's not like, I'm not trying to get trauma out. What the practice is about is generating the safety and the love and the condition for the anemone of the meridian system to open up, to release that stored dirt. Because prior to, if that safety isn't there, then the anemone, is that how you say it? Anemone. It's like
it makes sense to me. Yeah, I think so.
looking like it's like a sea creature that
Yeah.
opens up and then, but it's really quickly retracts when
I've
if
kind
it's
of got the image of a cat. If you try and tickle a cat's belly, and
yeah,
the cat might sort of roll to you, but you tickle its belly, and
yeah.
it latches onto you. But this is, you're giving the cat safety. You're stroking it and tending to it, and then it trusts you enough to
Yeah,
fully
yeah,
roll.
no, it is trust. It is safety, and you're specifically allowing on a physical level, the nervous system. So what happens with trauma on a physical level, like a Western explanation of it, is that you're constantly activating the fight flight response or freeze or fawn or like all these kind of like survival mechanisms of the nervous system. The opposite of that is the mode where the nervous system relaxes, like popularly called rest and digest, because this is where digestion, maintenance, healing, all of these things take place. Whereas in the other, there's adrenaline and, getting away from a threat kind of situation where there is no time for healing, there is no time for maintenance, there is no time for growth. And so, like I've read that you actually see, stumped growth in certain things don't develop right when children are being traumatized from an early age.
You were alluding to that in your childhood. There was something that wasn't developing in the way that a fully mature
Yeah,
adult would experiencing it. The
yeah,
addictions and things that came about.
yeah. And it wasn't all caused by, I can't, say that it was all caused by a troublesome childhood, because I didn't really have a troublesome childhood. Like what I described is this kind of be like constant but subtle feeling of not being actually seen or heard as a real person, but as an image in somebody's head, which I think is quite common. But I think that I was also quite sensitive to it, and so it kind of became an issue. But I've also stumped my own growth through drinking, through abusing various substances. Yeah, like which can also like having addiction in itself is traumatizing because you're doing all kinds of shit that you don't like yourself as you're doing it, but you're still doing it. So yeah, all of these things, but it was stored there. And finally, the practice of Divine Mother was able to address it. And it was like it was day and night, I came like it has blossomed in a way that it hadn't for years before. Like there's new gumption in my own practice and different kind of like, for example, Divine Mother is a major aspect of my current practice. Like what I also became aware of through my guru's teachings is just this like embodied sitting, which is, in Zen Buddhism, for example, they have lots of just sitting and sitting physically and just feeling the physical body. That's one sutra version of the Tantric Divine Mother practice, I would say, in that it also activates the meridian system when practiced correctly. It's a little bit more subtle and more difficult to get going, I find, than Divine Mother or Tantric practices. But nevertheless, it's kind of has that same, eventually you just drop into this very soft, loving physical body that actually at one point loses its physicality, becomes energetic, becomes spacious, and so it's more aligned with that spacious and loving mind. It's like a continuation of that. And recently we released a podcast episode, Baba and I, about Lightbody and internal arts, where I spoke about my current explorations with standing meditation, which has been like it's just fun again to practice. Like there's just so many different modalities, or how do you say, like different facets of this practice that now is very fun to explore. It's all leading towards the same thing where this physical body actually becomes perfectly free and weightless, just like the mind has been. Like the mind it becomes weightless at perfection of 10th.
Shane kind of described it as you're practicing emptiness, you've got this mind, you believe you're here, and then that drops. But Shane described it as, well, there's still something here. Your practice can see right the way through it, but there's still something. The body, in a way, has these trapped memories and still thinks it's here.
Mm. And it becomes a reference point in that open space. It becomes, the body is then perceived as physical, as a thing with like weight and all of these things. It's different, but it's still there. Like it's still on some level. This is why, I'm sure that many of those who have been interviewed before me have used the word echo. Echo. That's a metaphor that quite clearly describes the difference. It's still there, but it's kind of doesn't have the same obvious solidity as before, but it's still there, it's still happening, it's still uncomfortable. It's still something that will have to be dealt with for the full expression of the enlightened mind to take place. I would say that it seems that this light body should be quite more obvious to other beings than emptiness is. Emptiness is more of like it's a shift, clearly perceivable to the one experiencing it, but most people feel and sense you through the body, mostly.
I see.
Bodies that radiates like some energies, and that isn't in tune with the enlightened mind at that stage, first stage of Buddhahood. But once the body becomes a natural expression of all of these wonderful qualities of the enlightened mind, I think I have a feeling that's going to be a bit different in terms of how obvious it is.
So the natural expression, the natural Buddha nature expression of that in the mind is perfectly free flowing, but somehow the body fails to fully express that which is you have discovered. Hopefully you take the barrier away of the body and it's a full natural expression of Buddha nature in the physical realm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one thing I want to try and make a little bit clearer for us who aren't experiencing this yet, we're still working through emptiness, is once you realize emptiness, it's a full embodiment of emptiness, right? Because your chakra system and all the nadis run through your entire body. So in that sense, we've fully embodied the emptiness realization. So it's something else that's not fully embodied, but people might get confused that you could describe it like that, right? We've fully embodied this emptiness realization.
Well, here's the thing. So for the aura, there is one energy system covering it. For the body, there are two energy systems overlapping. You have the grosser meridian system that is closer to the physical body, and then you have this more subtle body of chakras and nadis, of centers and channels, where the selfing is stored. I don't have a very easy go-to name for it, like meridian system for the other. But anyways, they're overlapping. And so once you remove the subtlest one, you still have that space is still covered by the grosser one. So in that sense, you haven't fully embodied the qualities of the nature of mind. It's empty. That emptiness is kind of obscured by this other energy system that is still causing distress. So while it's there all the time, it's not as obvious as when the energy body of the physical body, the meridian system, once that activates, the light body activates, then one is fully embodied. But yeah, no, there are two systems there. That's what makes it so tricky to separate the one from the other before one drops off. It's occupying the same space. Makes sense?
And in some sense, we're still creating that confusion and that mess all the while it's still there. So once that's dropped off, there's no reinforcing these traumatic patterns anymore. And now we can open the anemone.
Yeah. Yeah, without kind of hindering. Yeah, so you just once you find a way of offering the security to the meridian system to kind of naturally open up, then there is no holding back. It just starts releasing. And what happens then experientially is that the natural qualities of the physical body become more available. So the whole body becomes soft, softer and softer. It becomes warmer and warmer. You start feeling the pranic currents, like the vital energy in the form of, like, for example, heat. You can feel it much more easily at first as it's kind of running through the system, but when you fully activate it, there is no prana running through. It's just a whole cosmic field of prana that is
Mm.
neither outside, neither inside. It's just one life
Mm.
kind of becomes revealed in you, so that you quite physically or quite like literally become the light of the universe. Like you are at that point the light. And this is what all the masters say, they point to themselves and they say that I am the light because that makes sense in that experience. It doesn't mean that other people aren't, it doesn't have the same potential. Yeah, so those two together seem to reveal what is then called immortality, that which never dies, which is that universal light, no separation at all.
There was something you said in that discussion you had with Bubba when you were describing Amar and her inhuman ability just to keep going, hug 5,000 people day after day after day. And you said about you don't have to reach outside for the prana anymore. You don't rely on the outside for your energy to keep going. You are the environment. Prana flows completely between you and the environment, and so therefore there is no separation anymore between your body and the environment. And
Yeah.
have you had you're alluding to cessations of the light body? Have you experienced some of those?
Uh, yeah. I've experienced not long ones, but brief
Mm.
ones. Yeah, I was specifically saying that she didn't have that. She didn't no longer needed them
Yeah,
to.
yeah.
But yes, I've had like shorter cessations where that has become evident. Like, and I wouldn't say like there's no free flow either. There's just the feeling is that it just appears like
Mm.
it's just out of nowhere, this life energy, like it's without basis, without cause, and it just appears. So there's not
Mm.
flowing in, it's not flowing out, it just is.
Mm.
Connection to everything is just revealed.
So can you describe the healing effect that it has on you? And maybe let's finish off with talking about what is this all for? What's it all about?
So this emotional baggage and reactivity and knots of the meridian system translates as physical, like there's a physical effect of it. So there's tightness in the physical body. There is that like nervousness of the experienced in the physical body. There's emotional disconnection from other beings when this takes place. And what the practice does is that it just melts away all of these things. And that's how it feels like, that the body is just becoming softer and softer, physically softer and softer. Then on an emotional level, you just don't become reactive. That's when the nervous system is always agitated, you're reacting to everything
Mm.
and taking things, even regardless of whether the selfing mechanism is there or not. You're kind of just out of a protective habit taking things personally. Like it's just this weird effect of that nervous system mode of fight flight. So all of that stuff is softening, which has a direct, impact on relationships. I mean, romantic relationships and family relationships and work relationships and how you meet strangers, relationships like fleeting encounters with others. All of that seems to be healing as well, as a direct result of the thoughts and emotions, like those patterns healing. Yeah, so I guess in terms of healing, like that would summarize it as physical, emotional, mental healing. The existential level has already been healed through emptiness, realization, insight practice.
So that's that pang of existentialism that I still feel. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Going one day. But now you're talking about the full expression of Buddhanature through your whole being. So hopefully that has some extra benefits for not just yourself, obviously, but for all those that you just described.
Yeah, from the glimpses, it's clear that it's the ultimate expression of, don't even want to use a foreign word like bodhicitta to describe it, because it's much more direct. It's like well, you could say compassion, but it's just this love, and it's like not, it's just there. And so it's the greatest act of love that you can do for other beings, it seems to me, to fully weed out the problem and assume your natural form that is formless. Getting too poetic here for my own taste. But yeah, that's how it seems to me, that it's just lovely as an experience. It's just lovely, as a recognition. Like just the thought of my son growing up in the presence of that, and my partner and everybody else, strangers, is highly motivating. Like you have to go all the way. Like that's there is no other option than going all the way, because the difference between going part of the way, even if it's like a permanent stage, and going all the way is very big in terms of Lightbody is all about realizing love. And so to complete wisdom and bodhicitta, you have to purify both the mind and the body.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much, Simha, for your very thorough exposition, for being so open about your path into the spiritual life. And we've covered some very thorough ground about the actual path of Amrita Mandala Sangha and what people can expect along the way, obstacles and things that you've overcome and how you've overcome them. And now talking about continuing the path after the realization of emptiness, and looks like there's some very positive potential aspects of that. So thanks so much. May many benefit from your kind words, and until we meet again.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Thanks for interviewing me, making it possible.
Thank you, Simon.